I love to see the towns passing by and to ride these rails neath God's blue sky. Let me travel this land from the mountains to the sea, 'cause that's the life I believe He meant for me. And when I'm gone and at my grave you stand, say God called home your rambling man.
Welcome to Ramblin' Man Podcast, episode number 125. This one's with Frank Murphy, the one and only, the teller of stories. Good to finally have Frank on the show. I was a guest on his show, Frank and Friends, a couple weeks ago. Had a great time. But this one, we went on for a little while, so I'm splitting it into 2 episodes. You'll have to tune back in 2 weeks to hear part 2 of my interview with Frank Murphy. If you'd like to find out more about Frank, go to his website at frankmurphy.com or go to frankandfriendsshow.com. And make sure you also give him follows on all the social. Outbound links are on both of the websites. And subscribe to his YouTube channel for the Frank and Friends Show. I really appreciate him for being on and doing some marathon podcasting. Sponsor this week is Feral Giant. Feral Giant is a graphic design, illustration, and social media consultation company based here in Knoxville, Tennessee. So they do work for clients big and small all over the country, all over the globe, in fact. But they also do photography, videography, video editing, and audio editing, website design, SEO, writing, content development. Hell, they'll babysit your kids if it nets them money. So make sure you give them a follow on social media on either Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Feral Giant. And be sure to give them an email today and hire them for your next project. Without much further ado, here's the episode. Like if you start slandering Aaron Donovan.
That's a possibility.
Yeah. And then...
but I'll be good, you know.
I swear I'll get us back on track.
I'm not worried about it.
Okay.
I'm not worried about it because if you don't, I will.
Okay. And some things I already know, but I'll still ask them.
No, I'm cool with it. I was on the way over talking to my wife right before I left. I said, I'm really curious what's going to happen because I don't know what he knows or doesn't know about me. Or, you know, because everyone knows me from different pigeonholes and different silos, and they're shocked when they realize that I have more than one silo or more than one pigeonhole.
Yeah, there is one thing I didn't, this will be was a teaser. There was something I didn't know until you posted a photo of my logo on a T-shirt.
Yes.
Of Bean.
Yes.
That I didn't know that aspect because I know of Kevin and Bean from podcasts.
Oh, wow.
And,
see?
And stuff like that. And,
you know Kevin and Bean. That's a mind blower right there.
And Bean, Jimmy Pardo, who's my favorite comedian.
Yeah.
He was on Kevin and Bean a lot. And Bean was also on
Never Not Funny.
Never Not Funny and A Cup of Tea and a Chat.
Right. I listened. In fact, he just sent me.
Okay.
I mean, this is terrible to say this, but I just received in my WhatsApp tomorrow's episode of Cup of Tea and a Chat.
Nice. But they are on Jimmy Pardo's podcast network now. So I know a lot about them through that. But we will get to that later. Okay. That is a teaser.
Good tease.
Yeah, teaser. So where are you originally from?
I am from New York.
Okay. New York, New City proper or the country?
Well, my parents are from the Bronx, and I was born in Albany because my dad was working in Albany.
Okay.
My dad was a newspaper reporter and then got a job with UPI as the New York State Legislature correspondent.
Okay.
So I might have been born actually. He was working for the governor. He became an assistant press secretary to the governor of New York around the time I was born. But he only kept that job for a year or two, and then moved back down to the suburbs of New York City, Yonkers.
Okay.
Yonkers, which is just the next thing. If you've seen Hello, Dolly, you know where Yonkers is. It's the next thing north of the Bronx.
Okay.
And so I was born in Albany, but grew up in Yonkers. And my dad, at that point, was working for a PR firm in the Chrysler Building in New York City.
Oh, wow. Okay. Was it...
My mom had been a school teacher, a second grade teacher in the Bronx and in Albany when I was born, and then I think stopped working because my sister came along the next year. Yeah.
cheaper for her to stay home than
At that point,
babysitters and
right. Yeah, she worked again later in her life as doing all sorts of odd jobs. But.
So was it like kind of small town how it's presented, like you have your block and you kind of stay on your block, or
yeah, it's funny because it's everything at the same time, because on the
Right.
one hand, my earliest memory is this apartment that we lived on Bronx River Road. And then shortly thereafter, when my third child came along, my second sister, there's three of us all together. So my sister's 4 years younger than me. And when Mom was pregnant with her, we moved to a house in a really nice neighborhood, as it turns out, in Yonkers. And it had all the things. In fact, I was reminded of it driving here. It had the sidewalks and the tree-lined streets, and the houses, to me, didn't seem as close together as they do now. When I go
Right.
back and visit it, I'm like, the streets are so narrow and the houses are so close together.
You're
and,
like,
yeah, it's also odd to me now, but it seemed huge.
Yeah.
In those days, we had what to me felt like a huge house. And then, the real estate has gone through the roof in that neighborhood, so I couldn't afford to ever live there again. But a few of my old classmates from kindergarten through 7th or 8th grade managed somehow to stay in the neighborhood, to buy a house and still live there. And I was invited to go give the 8th grade graduation speech at my old grammar school. So my friend, who I've known since kindergarten, is the one who sets all this up. She says, I'll have somebody, we'll have Eddie pick you here. One of our classmates will pick you up at the airport. He has a limo business, so
nice.
he so that was pretty easy. Didn't know. And then I stay at her house, which is this old Tudor, but she's redone the whole thing, and it's like just jaw dropping. I now am in a ritzy, rich neighborhood.
Yeah.
Which to me was a regular middle class neighborhood when I lived there.
Yeah.
Which was the 1960s.
I'm always fascinated by
And 70s. I lived there till 79.
I'm always fascinated when you see it in movies, and then I've got friends that lived up there that, like, I've got a friend who lived just across the river in Jersey, and she's like, oh no, we rarely ever went into the city. We just kind of stayed. I was like, what are you doing with your life, man? I was like,
I went into the city a lot.
oh, okay. Okay.
Not a lot, but I mean enough that I was comfortable. By the time I was in high school, I had no qualms about walking down to the train station, because that's where we lived, was Norman Rockwell. This is where I lived. I lived in the neighborhood where Norman Rockwell literally painted the train station of my neighborhood.
Okay.
And I've got a print of it, because my mother gave me a print of it, and my friend Nancy also gave me a print of it. So I got these little prints of Norman Rockwell, Crestwood train station. That's how picturesque it was.
Right.
My dad would take the train downtown every day. And by the time I was in high school, I certainly knew how to hop on a train and take it down to Grand Central Terminal, walk around Manhattan for a while, and get on a train and go home. I heard you talking about, on the Aaron Donovan episode, about your dad or uncle who would take the bus into Knoxville and watch creature features all day.
My dad, yeah, when he was like 8 to 10 years old, I think.
Yeah, see, I didn't, not that young, no, not yet. I had to be in high school, so I'd have enough money to
It's
be able
also
to buy
my
it.
family, so my dad was probably 5'10" at like 10 years old. I was trying to think. Somebody was talking about height. Good Lord, I bring up height too much, but
Well, you can't help it.
I know I know where I was at when I was a freshman in high school, because we had football and we had to tell our measurements. I was like, but holy crap, I was probably 5'10" in like the 6th or 7th grade.
I'm hoping to get there someday.
To where when people talk about it, it's like, no, I look like an adult when I was like 6th, 7th grade. I was like, it's weird.
I heard this episode where you mentioned the phrase that you looked someone in the eye, and I'm yelling at the podcast, no way. That's bogus.
Oh, that
He's-
was probably Tiny.
He's never looked anyone in the eye.
Tiny was a manager of the Guitar Center, and he was 7 feet tall.
Good God.
And probably weighed about 500 to 600 pounds.
How tall are you? 6'9"?
I'm 6'7".
6'7"?
6'7".
I think my friend Bean of KROQ fame is
Yeah.
6'8" or 9". I mean, he's
Yeah.
not called Bean because his name is Gene and he's tall and thin.
Yeah.
So String Bean, you know.
Well, that's the funny thing about listening to Never Not Funny is they talk about their fans that are tall, and they keep mentioning people. I was like, I'm taller than all of them. Damn
Yep.
it! I was like, and there were times I've met Jimmy and Matt quite a few times, but Jimmy especially in Nashville. And there were times where they have brought me up there. It's like there was that one dude that sat down front that didn't look like he was sitting on the next person's lap because he was so big. I was like, oh, that's me.
That's you.
That's me. Yeah,
That's
Hey, guys.
terrific.
Hey guys, that's me.
I love it.
Every time I see him, he either makes me step down or, like the last time, he just walked over and got a stool and got up on his knees on the stool and still was not eye
Oh,
level
that's
with.
hilarious.
I love it because it's like he knows well enough now to just be like, oh, this I can mess around with him. I'm like, yep. You
That's
can.
nice. That's nice.
Okay. So with your dad working in PR and stuff, did you ever get to go into the city with him and see what that
Yes.
was like?
Yes.
Was it really like Mad Men?
Well, I guess it was. I mean, he had a secretary who
Yeah.
knew things about our family and took care of things. And it was a fairly influential public relations firm because it was originally founded by a guy named Ivy Lee. Now, all right, who's Ivy Lee? Well, if you've taken the class or studied public relations, you're like, he's the father of modern public relations going back to the early 20th century.
Yeah.
Well, he founded this company, and then his partner was T.J. Ross, and then eventually Ivy Lee had died, but it's still Ivy Lee and T.J. Ross for the longest time. And then they finally renamed it to T.J. Ross and Associates about the time that my dad started working there. So they had clients. Some of my dad's clients were Pan Am, Chrysler.
Yeah.
His most well-known client. Let me rephrase that. His biggest client, the one that he did the most work on, and the one that got us to go on these exotic trips and things like that, was Bacardi rum.
Oh,
So I love
okay.
to say how Bacardi rum put me through school because, my sisters and I had Catholic parochial school education. That cost money.
Yeah.
It's even, my parents had to scrimp and save a little bit, but Bacardi rum is where the money's coming from ultimately.
Nice.
So my dad would fly to Puerto Rico at least, multiple times a year. Miami at least once a year.
Yeah.
And then we went on a couple of these trips to Miami and Bermuda as kids. And I think I was in kindergarten when I went to Miami for the first time. Because my dad was on a business trip, and it was a sailboat race. The business trip was a sailboat race. It's called the Bacardi Cup.
This
my-
is what people dream of.
I know. So my dad says basically as a PR guy, he's going to cover, and a former newspaper reporter,
Yeah.
he's going to cover the sailboat race with pictures and stories and press releases and all the things, and feed that to the Miami Herald and to any other news outlet that'll run it.
Yeah.
Because it's you're going to mention Bacardi in practically every sentence.
Mm.
So we've got a picture of me. Probably I went in kindergarten and again in second grade. So one of those two trips, there's a picture of my sister and me in these big life preservers in a boat on Biscayne Bay, where my dad is taking pictures of sailboats racing by, and we're just like looking out the other way. We're not even looking at the race. We don't know. And there's at one of these instances, there's a TV news crew on the boat with us that my dad has taken
Yeah.
out to show them the sailboat race, and all through Catholic school going, first grade through eighth grade, I would always have some kind of Bacardi memorabilia, or not even memorabilia, gear, merch. I had a book bag that was the same book bag they gave to the ship captains, the yacht captains, Bacardi Cup, and whatever year it was.
Yeah.
So we had this array of Bacardi bags with a bat logo. I'd have a windbreaker. If it was a cold day, I'd wear a Bacardi windbreaker. If I had a pen, I'm learning penmanship. I got this pen that clicks, and the nun's looking at me, what is that? And it's got a little window on it that says Bacardi rum, the mixable one, always and always. I mean, I could have told you anything about Bacardi. And I did a whole comedy routine one time in a fundraiser about how I was my parents' bartender, but it's all true.
Oh yeah.
I'd have to know where the key to the liquor cabinet was, and I'd go make them a mixed drink based on whether they wanted whatever. I mean, Ryan Ginger, Scotch and soda. I could have told you all the different varieties of Bacardi rum. I knew the difference between light rum, dark rum, and Yeho and 151 because we had all of them.
Oh my God! Whereas with my family, it was Marlboro Miles. So I had all the Marlboro gear rolling into seventh grade with like a Marlboro jacket on, and it's like, what is happening? Like back then, it was just like, well, yeah, why wouldn't he have a Marlboro jacket? on? Yeah.
Like Joe Camel, ultimately similar in the later years. Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by this, and this goes for you too, because I'm kind of in this world too, where I can feel like I can be on, and then I have to stop peopling. I call it stop peopling for a second. I need to go home and not be around, not talk, or not be on. So did you notice that with your dad? Like when he's in front of the PR, the TV station people, it's like 110% dad, and then at home it's like, all right, let's not talk for an hour. Like,
no, I don't think he was like that, and I'm not necessarily like that. I'm definitely one of those energy vampires, extroverts, whereas I can go as long as I'm interacting with people.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I'm all alone, then I crash. My son definitely needs that break. My son is more what you described, where he's fine in social situations, but he then needs to withdraw and recharge. For me, I need to engage to recharge.
Yeah.
Walking in this room and talking to you is recharging my battery as opposed to draining it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was with friends had like a housewarming party yesterday, and my friend went with me, and there was a point I just looked at her and was like, she's ready to go. She's ready to go. So when we started walking back, she was like, ever since the pandemic, I've had a harder and harder time like being in social situations because I'm just so out of it at this point that I'm not used to it, and it weirds me out a little bit to where I need to go.
Well, I freaked out 2 weeks ago because I had a married couple come over to my house to be on my podcast.
Okay.
And they each did one episode, so we filmed them back to back. I did the wife talked with her for 40 minutes. And then the husband for 45, and he was like pointing out, I beat you, I win. And then I had them stay, and we chatted, and I fed them lunch, and we just, because they're both former radio people.
Okay.
And we're talking radio, and we're talking podcast, and we're talking improv, because they've come to see me do improv as well, and all these things, to the point where they finally look at the clock, and they're like, oh no, we got to go take care of the dog. We got to go. And I even gave them a fig tree on the way out. I'm like, here, take a baby fig tree. Please come back and visit me again. Okay, so then I post the episodes, and I think they're good. My friend Bean, who listens to the podcast, sends me a note that they were good. And I send them the episodes, and I try to tag them on Facebook. Nothing.
Yeah.
They don't share the episode. The episode has lower views and downloads than most of the others, because if the other person on the show shares it, I mean, we can go on about Facebook and how they're throttling back all of my posts.
Oh God!
But if the other person were to share the Facebook post, all of us, you can see this, the views skyrocket, or especially there's a couple of guest co-hosts whose moms have shared.
Okay,
and you can spot them because they have 100 views versus 20 for somebody else. I'm like, this is not right.
Yeah.
Something's wrong. But so I didn't hear from them. And I'm stalking them on Facebook, trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
I think they might have gone on vacation. This morning, just before I got here, I got a text from one of them. I think they finally listened to the episode, and were just being self-critical of it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you did a great job, but you freaked me out because I thought I wore you out. I thought we call it franking it to 11, where.
That needs to be the next T-shirt, franking it to 11.
It does. Okay, well, if only I knew a great designer. But I need to. So I did that. I think I overdid it. I'm like, oh no, I've scared them away. I have overpowered them with my own ego and personality, and they can't take it anymore, and they don't want to talk to me anymore. That's what I thought.
So because I think you know this person, I'm sure you know this person, Shane Ryan.
Yes.
So I had him over here, and we recorded, I think, 7 hours on him telling his story.
Wow.
And then stood in the kitchen for another hour and a half talking.
Yeah.
And he was killing time before he had to do a show downtown. But there was a point where I was like, I can't, my throat is, I don't know how y'all do it. My throat is killing me. I can't.
Ludens.
Oh,
Luden's
okay.
cough drops. I always keep a few in my pocket.
Well, on the flip side, I always love telling this story. I went to Charleston one time for 5 or 6 days, and I smoked 4 to 5 cigars a day the entire time I was there. And I've had friends go, I don't know how you did that. It's like, well, I couldn't talk for 3 days afterwards, but I somehow was able to just choke
I've
them
heard
down.
you discuss your eating skills.
Oh.
So you got to go in some of those contests, man. You got to go in some of those.
So I can't remember if Erin and I talked about it, but she is challenging me to this pizza thing. In
Yes, you
Asheville.
did. That's exactly what I'm referring to. Is that Erin wants you to eat this $50 huge whatever.
3-foot pizza.
Jeez.
To where I was like, if I'm not timed, I can totally do it.
Yeah.
And she was,
I thought of a meme that said or it's a line from some comedian, so they made it into a meme.
I posted it the other day.
That was you. Every pizza is a personal size pizza if you try hard
It's
enough.
Bill Murray.
Okay, thank you.
Because I went to Adopo, and my special lady friend, she will listen to this, so that's the first time I've ever referred to her on this. So I'll probably get a text
Adopo is the
sometime
best.
tomorrow. And I was telling her, she was like, "Are you hungry?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll eat a whole pizza by myself. Like you get your thing, and I'll
Sure.
get my thing." And then I thought of that quote, and I looked up. I was like, "Oh, it's Bill Murray," and I posted that.
Well, I think it's more polite if you call them flatbread because you're allowed to eat a whole flatbread by yourself, and it's not considered rude.
It was so good. I tore through it. It's funny watching friends. Like we went to Inskip Grill one time, and I got a burger that was about this big, and I watched my friend who got a burger with no bun. She still hadn't finished hers by the time I got done with mine. I was like, "No, it was good."
Let me connect two random dots real quick.
Okay.
My friend Bean, who lives in England but is moving back to New Orleans for a period of time because for family reasons, his mother-in-law is going to live near them and they're going to care for her and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So then he'll eventually move back to England. But last time, before he's headed off to England, he stops by in Knoxville for a visit.
Okay.
And as he would normally, anytime he was passing through, it's, we're good friends, right?
Yeah.
So one of those trips through Knoxville, I think my son was in town, and I said, let's go get pizza. And I have in mind that we're going to go to Adopo.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't you've got a guy who lives in New Orleans.
Yeah.
You're not going to, and you're going to go out to someplace nice. And I know he likes pizza. So as we're driving there, he's like, man, how far away is this place? Do you know how many pizza places we must have passed by the time? This is insane. Why are we driving all the way? Because I live in West Knoxville, or what do you call it? 3792.
3792 too far. Or East Nashville.
That's where I live. 3792 too far.
Yeah.
So we're driving down to Adopo, and he's like, man, this is just for a pizza? Well, he took his words back. As soon as he gets a bite of it, he's like, okay, everything I said in the car, I take it back. This was worth it. So
Neil let Brian know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, the food, yeah.
So anyway, I wanted to connect Bean because you talked about him twice already, and you mentioned Adopo, and all these things are in my head.
So next time he comes down, you got to take him to Jackie's Dream.
Oh, Jackie's Dream?
Yeah, because that may fry his brain.
Yeah.
Pun unintended. Okay, so I'm going to go back. So your mom was a teacher.
Yes, second grade. She says, I spent I forget how many years it was, but her joke was, I spent 6 years in second grade. Like they kept holding her back, was her joke.
Was education super important with you and your sisters from your mom?
I would suppose so. I mean, it just sort of was natural. I mean, we learned how to read, we learned how to write, all the things. I don't know, because my father, as I said, was a writer and my mother was a teacher, so we're around this stuff.
Okay.
It wasn't it's like you just grew up in that soup.
Yeah.
It's what you're surrounded with is books that they had, and my father would read newspapers voraciously and bring home stacks of newspapers from work. The Daily News, the New York Times, and then I was a newspaper boy delivering the local Herald Statesman for Gannett before Gannett was a thing.
Yeah,
They were just a baby company back then. So that's in magazines, and I worked in one of my first jobs other than a newspaper boy was being a page in a library, putting books away.
Oh yeah.
So all of that stuff, and that we went to Catholic school because it was the better school in the neighborhood, and then they even pulled me out of that Catholic school to send me to an all-boys Catholic school for 7th and 8th grade because they thought it would help me get into a better high school, so I guess there was that track, path of, make sure you're prepared for higher education.
Okay. I usually ask that of artists, like who had artist parents. Like, did
Yeah.
they kind of foster that in you? Was there a room dedicated to that? Did you go to museums? And
Ironically, my dad really wanted me to do everything else except that.
really,
He tried to
Okay.
discourage me from going into media, and was, I think, disappointed at how bad I was at sports. His brother was a doctor, a very successful doctor, and his brother had 7 kids, and it seemed like they all excelled at sports. They'd go
Okay.
skiing, they'd win medals at the swim meets. Everything they did well. And meanwhile, everything I did, athletic-wise and sports-wise, I did poorly. In Little League, I got 1 hit in my entire Little League career, and it's
God.
because the coach told me to bunt. And the other team wasn't expecting it, so I laid this bunt up the third base line, and I was able to leg it out to first base. Every time for the remainder of my Little League career, everyone yelled, as soon as I get up to bat, he's going to bunt, and they all came in, pulled in,
Yeah.
and I never got another hit. That was it. I mean, I was mortified. I like baseball, but I don't like it that much, anymore. I was bad at everything,
Okay.
sports-wise, everything.
Okay. Okay.
Ultimately, I did join the swim team, and I found comfort in that. I liked that. It wasn't great,
Yeah.
but I managed to. I think the best I ever did was 3rd place in backstroke. And you know how it is in swim meets. If you can get 3rd place by being by just completing it sometimes. I think I might have beat somebody. Maybe there was 4 people maybe in the race, maybe. But I remember getting 1 medal for a 3rd place finish in backstroke and being so happy.
Yeah. So sports weren't your thing. Did your school have a performing arts aspect to it? Were you into performing as a kid?
I was into it, and as a young kid, in early grades, I would do all sorts of odd things, like when the kid at lunchtime and recess, when the kids are playing this game of cat and mouse, which is like a exaggerated tag. I don't know if I don't know what kids play, but they had this game called cat and mouse. I would talk into my pencil eraser and do play-by-play of the cat and mouse game, and find myself fascinating.
Yeah.
And but then in 2nd or 3rd grade, that we wanted to do a play, a typical Thanksgiving play, right? But we didn't have one, so I wrote it. So I wrote a Thanksgiving play based on whatever storybook I had about pilgrims, and basically it's the love story of Miles Standish and Priscilla Alden, or Priscilla, what's her name, John Alden, that love triangle between Miles Standish and John Alden and Priscilla.
Okay.
And that's the play, because I've copied it. I've got the idea basically. Well, we couldn't get any of the boys to play John Alden because he would have to ask out Mary Beth Longobardi as Priscilla. So Elizabeth Shost plays.
And she obviously has cooties. I mean, come on.
This is where I felt stupid, because I had a crush on Mary Beth Longobardi. She was the prettiest girl. And I wanted to, I'm thinking, I should be in the play, but I have written it in such a fashion that I'm not in it. I'm the narrator, because I'm afraid to be in it.
Okay.
So I'll write the play, and I'll be the host, and I'll be the MC, and I'll get up there. I'll be Alistair Cook, like a Masterpiece Theater. I'll do all the intros and outros, whatever. I can do all of that. I'm comfortable with all of that.
And I'll get to see somebody else kiss Mary Beth because.
Yeah, so Elizabeth Shost had to play John Alden.
It's the reverse of Shakespeare. It's women playing.
We couldn't get a guy to do it. Couldn't get a kid to do it. We could get a kid named Richard Collins, coincidentally. Played Miles Standish. But well, it's funny. I remember that. That was, I think, 4th grade, maybe. That's quite a while back.
It's weird the things you can remember and then not remember what you had for lunch yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are things I can remember. It's like, oh yeah, I still remember Dwight Smith's owes me a nickel from 6th grade. I was like, but I can't remember what I ate yesterday.
Well, it's a matter of volume. A nickel is very small.
Yeah. When I was a kid, that nickel was a lot of money.
And easy to remember, whereas what you ate yesterday, too much.
I don't know.
Just too much information.
It's probably something boring. That's how I do the food things. Is most of the time I eat baked chicken,
yes,
and vegetables. So I eat the most boring stuff most of the time.
Are you like that? Where my wife finds it frustrating that I'm perfectly fine eating the same thing every day. For if she goes out of town, when she goes out of town, I might just eat the same leftover chicken, and salad every day, and I don't get tired of it.
Yeah, I bulk cook and just...
Yeah. I mean, my goal is to finish it before it goes bad, right? That's the only thing I've got in mind. And with her, we'll order out from our favorite barbecue place, M&M Catering on Middlebrook, and we've got some in the kitchen. But then she made chicken, and now so it's going to be 4 days before that we get back to that M&M. I'm like, no, can we just finish that? It's delicious.
It's like a phone off the hook. You got to hang it up.
Yeah, I got to finish that.
I got to finish that. Yeah, I eat the same thing all the time.
I never get bored with it. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
There will come up. There was one period, I think, for 2 years where I ate Lucky Charms cereal for lunch every day.
See?
When I worked at the print shop, to where they would make fun of me. They were like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I don't know. I'm like 25 and I can eat anything."
I'm embarrassed to admit that I was probably in my early 20s working at a bank, and I discovered I liked Big Macs, and there was a McDonald's close to the bank where I worked, and I could get in and get out, and all within the course of the lunch hour, and I just always ordered the Big Mac. I never strayed from it.
Yeah.
I didn't experiment with the McDonald's menu because I found one thing that I enjoyed. I'm like, that's it. I haven't had one now probably in 20 years, but who cares? For that time period, I had enough to. I'm like, okay.
You had enough to make.
But it was just easier. I'm like, okay, I got something. I'll just order the same thing. Same thing when I go to Arby's. I mean, as much as I look at the menu, I always end up getting the turkey and Swiss sandwich with the spicy brown mustard.
Every time.
Yeah.
That when I worked at Taco Bell, not to brag, but
you're showing off.
Yeah, Krispy Kreme was right next door, so I would always get a blueberry donut, a chocolate glazed donut, and a French vanilla cappuccino. And every time, and I did not like Taco Bell's food.
Oh, really?
So I went from 330 to 210 in a year.
That's a lot.
Because I was like, I don't like any of this food, so I'm just going to
not eat it.
Eat donuts and French vanilla cappuccino and work a 10-hour shift.
Wow.
And that was my entire...
See, my mistake was working at Baskin-Robbins in high school.
Yeah.
And I never got tired of it. I would make myself a milkshake or a sundae every day.
Well, I worked at the Owlspell Ballpark growing up, so what was her name, Miss Brenda? Miss Brenda would take care of me, and she would make me anything I wanted. Pizza rolls with chicken tenders on top of it, whatever. So that's how I got to that and my grandmother. That's how I got to the 330. Okay, outside of like what you were seeing with your dad, was there anything that you saw on your own that made you want to get into the world of performing or radio or anything?
Well, sure. And a lot of it was, being a consumer of media. Right. I loved television. I was, and I loved radio. But my parents listened to old people radio. So I wasn't listening to. I grew up in New York, and I could have been listening to WABC in the heyday of the 60s and 70s, when they were just the biggest thing. But I didn't listen to any of that. So I didn't listen to the Beatles. I didn't listen to the Rolling Stones. I mean, pick all of the big bands from the 1960s and 70s. And I was listening to the big bands of the 1940s, like Glenn Miller, because that's what my parents listened to. And my parents liked opera and Broadway. So they would listen to that around the house on record albums. And my dad would listen to WQXR, the radio station of the New York Times, which was classical, but they ran the opera on the weekends. And then he would listen to 93 WPAT, beautiful music. And but mostly what I remember was they would listen to this talk station, and maybe it was my grandma who lived with us for a while, but the house seemed to always have on WOR, which was, like I said, the old people talk station. So it had Rambling with Gambling in the morning, which was, and this guy was really good at what he did. John B. Gambling started the show back in the 30s, and then his son, John A. Gambling, picked up the show at some point in the 50s and continued it well through his whole lifetime until his son, John R. Gambling, continued the show until they finally finished it up.
I'm too OCD. It should be John B. Gambling, A Gambling,
remember,
Z. Yes. Z Gambling. You're going backwards.
That's how you remember which is which. So that was the morning show. And then Arlene Francis, who, if you ever watched any of these old panel shows like What's My Line or To Tell the Truth, you know who Arlene Francis is. I don't really know what her claim to fame was, except that she had a radio talk show where she talked about Broadway. Yeah. And there were these other people on there who just would talk about New York and Broadway and blah, blah, blah. It was like listening to podcasts practically. Yeah. This husband and wife team, the Fitzgeralds and the McCanns, had talk shows, and these people. Well, at some point when I was at a very impressionable age, so probably early teens, like around maybe 12, 12, 13, they hired the legendary comedy duo of Bob and Ray to be the afternoon show on this radio station. And that blew my mind because here's Bob and Ray doing really, I mean, I think one way to describe it is it's subversive in a not a matter of politically speaking, but in a matter of comedic style. And I love that style, and I am probably more influenced by listening to them than anything else because they can lull you into complacency with because it sounds like a regular boring talk show. And they're going along doing the interview. I mean, one of their most famous bits ever is the Komodo dragon expert. So a guy is on there interviewing Dr. Darrell Dexter is here from the such and such institute. He's the world's leading expert on Komodo dragons. Welcome, Dr. Dexter. And Dr. Dexter launches into this thing. Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. You know, the Komodo dragon is the world's largest living land lizard. It goes up to 15 feet in length, and it's found primarily in the Indonesian archipelago on the island of Sundar. And then the interview goes, so where do they come from? The interviewer has a list of questions prepared, and in every instance, he hasn't been listening to the expert.
Oh, my God.
And that's the basic bit. I mean, the interviewer's always asking, showing he wasn't paying attention. So they're using this inane topic of Komodo dragons to satirize media and idiot interviewers and talk show hosts who don't listen.
Yeah.
And we have that. I mean, you can see that in every city, on every local news station, on almost every radio group somewhere is that guy who interviews without listening.
Yeah.
And it just cracks me up. So anyway, when I do an occasional joke on the radio, I sometimes will do it in a fashion that if you're not actively listening, it just sounds like me doing the standard DJ patter.
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing the regular, blah, 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 cruising along. I've got, 17 seconds maybe to get this information through before they start singing. And I'll blah, 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 blah. And then I drop this absurd punchline, right before they start singing. And if you weren't paying attention, it'll fly right over your head. And I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Because sometimes it boomerangs and comes back around and then finally smacks you.
I find I have to explain my reference because I'm such a nerd. Like I will make some reference and I'll realize I'm around people. I was like, oh, you don't know what Tron is. Like, oh my God, you've never seen The Godfather. That's a weird thing is to be around people who have never seen some tent poles. So if I make a quote, pull a quote from The Godfather, it's like, I don't know what that is.
That happens to me sometimes in improv when they're talking about some movie and I look at them and go, I did see it in the theater when it came out and that was the last time I saw it. That happened to me with Top Gun. I'm watching the Maverick with my wife and I'm trying to remember the movie because I saw it. When did it come out? 1986.
86. I think.
Yeah, that's when I watched it. In fact, I didn't even see it when it came out. I was working in radio by then, and we went down to a screening room in Washington D.C., like an MPAA screening room, and saw a preview screening of Top Gun because we were going to give away tickets to it. And that's the one and only time I saw it.
So I will say you're good because I rewatched it before I went and saw Maverick. And it took me 3 goes to get through it. It is so bad. It is so bad.
So your memory of it is better than the actual
film? Oh, no, I
film?
didn't like it back then.
Oh, okay.
I never liked it. And it was just like, I watched it and I was like, I can't take this. And I would have to pause it and go do something else.
Do you love pausing movies and going to the bathroom? And instead, because going to the theater, I'm spoiled now. I'm tired. My wife loves to go to the theater. She loves to get the popcorn. She loves to watch a movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I am still a theater person. We had a good run. Like my friends and I, we went on Monday nights and we saw Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Is that the name of a film, or is that the overall? Is that the topic?
That's the name of a movie. It's with Michelle Yeoh.
Okay,
and it is
because I was taking it as you went every Monday and you saw everything, and you went to all the different theaters everywhere, and then so during this block of your life, all at once, you got to see all the movies. So I took
got to look at all.
I took it quite literally.
It's a great film. Then we went and saw this. I can never remember the name of it. It's The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent or something. It's Nicolas Cage playing Nicolas Cage.
I saw the trailer for that, and
it was
interested.
really fun. It was really
so
fun.
At some point, if it crosses my path, I'll check it out. But I'm not going to. I don't know if I'll go out of my way.
And then we saw Top Gun.
Oh.
And when we finished Top Gun, my buddy Sean and I are sitting next to one another, and we're looking at the screen. And then right when the film ended, we just looked at one another, and here's the face we had. Like, it was like, that was so much fun. Like, I was like, we were just like giddy idiots. Like, oh my God, that movie just happened. That was amazing.
Without spoiling it, they ripped it off from Star Wars, right?
Oh, a little bit.
I mean, the whole bit where they have to fly down the canyon and drop the bomb down the Death Star. I mean, that's the same as Star Wars, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. I mean, not a little bit. I mean, like exactly. Well, gotta fly. I mean, look at Star Wars. They got to fly through the thing. That's a movie I've seen more than once because you show it to the kids and whatnot. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure it's the same mission.
It kind of is.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. There was a podcast I was listening to that they made that. Oh, it was my friend Michael's podcast where they said that, and I was like, I never thought of that. It never dawned on me.
Oh, I'm sitting in the theater going, what? Why can't you make up a new mission? This is we've seen this. This is Star Wars. We all know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
You know you're going to hit it.
Yeah, you're going to win. Yeah. I'm going to go backwards. So you're talking about the TV and stuff you're watching. This is something I've thought about a lot in like the last year about how kids now, I don't mean to sound like old man on my front yard, but kids now are missing out on discovering older music. And it's weird to say that after the Kate Bush ran up that hill. But I mean, when I was a kid, it was you had the cool uncle or older brother. Yeah. It was like, you need to listen to this. And they hand you Led Zeppelin.
I cannot explain how my 8-year-old grandson loves classic rock. I can't explain it, but he does. And I'm assuming his parents have introduced him to some of it. But he uses the Amazon Alexa like he's a master at it. And they have the Music Unlimited. So I mean, my daughter puts these weird songs in his head.
Yeah.
But for a while, I mean, I remember he was briefly obsessed with the song Popcorn by Hot Butter. But now it's Bon Jovi.
Okay.
He likes Imagine Dragons, which that's not classic rock, but, you know, there's a lot of these older songs that just he wanted to put on his playlist for him. You know, when cool grandpa will make him a Spotify playlist, his mom won't. But you know, there's video game music that he likes.
Okay.
And these classic rock songs that. So I don't know how he discovered them. As it wasn't me.
But I started thinking when you were talking about TV, I thought about that as like when I was a kid. It was like one of my favorite shows as a kid was Barney Miller.
Okay.
Because my parents let me watch essentially anything as long as it didn't have boobs in it.
Well, they would record it and you'd watch it all day Saturday. Yeah.
Or Nick at Night came on when I was like I was a little bit older, but still kind of young when Nick at Night, and they would just show.
Now, when you say, I mean, because I'm thinking now, all of a sudden, like shows like Charlie's Angels, they pretty much had boobs on the show.
Yeah.
They on broadcast
like
television.
So,
but
no. Like my parents would let me hear cursing, see violence, but anytime, like we watched the Dragnet film with Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd.
So like talking about like HBO.
Yeah, and there was a woman who stripped and she had pasties on her boobs, and I heard, "Turn your head." But I got to watch the Robin Williams special where he dropped the C-bomb like
oh my gosh
10 times, and they were like, "No, that's okay." Or I got to watch Hunter or Magnum PI or Equalizer when I was like 6.
Yeah.
Where they're killing people, and that's okay. But boobs was the weird line.
For some reason, my dad thought it was appropriate to take me as a kid, to see The Exorcist in a theater, but I didn't get the full impact because it was the discount theater by that point.
Oh, okay.
And the projector was out of focus, so we watched I watched The Exorcist, but it was blurry.
So her vomit spewing out was blurry.
And again, what movie that came out in '73? So this might have been. It was like probably the next year. So it was like, like I said, it was a second run theater, and that's the last time I saw the movie.
Okay.
Because why would I see it again? I've already seen it.
So when I was 11, I love telling on my dad on this one. He's flipping around. It's like midnight. He's about to go to bed, and he was like, "Oh hell, Deliverance is coming on. You need to watch that.
Oh man.
And he's like, it's going to start in a few minutes. You need to watch Deliverance. And I was 11 years old. So I'm sitting on the couch
That's
with
hilarious.
windows behind us. And the whole time I'm like,
I bet.
are there rednecks coming to kill us? Like,
Yeah.
And I sat up and watched that film. And it wasn't until I was like in my 30s, I was like, what the hell was wrong with you? Don't show me Deliverance when I was 11. Like,
And now that's been boiled down to a T-shirt joke in Pigeon Forge.
oh, yeah.
Paddle
Yeah.
faster, I hear banjos.
So I'll tell you this story. Like, my uncles all served in pretty hairy stuff in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was young, I'm trying to think if I've told this story before or if I can tell this story. I will. It's fine.
Kurt can cut it out.
43 minutes in.
Yeah, Kurt
so,
can always cut it out
yeah,
if you don't
Kurt,
want to.
Thank you, Kurt or Kirk. When I was young, I heard the story about my uncle got out of Vietnam and he went hiking. He went camping up in Jellicoe, and he's sitting there around his campfire. And the story I got told when I was younger was these two rednecks came out of the woods. It was literally Deliverance, and we're just like sat down with him, and he gave him like a beer or something. They drank the beer, and they're like, we got to go out, but we'll be back. And the story I got told was he dumped the fire. When he heard them finally get away, he dumped the fire, threw everything in the back of his car, and got the hell out of there.
I bet.
So the story I got told by my other uncle when I was 15, 16 was, oh, no, that's not how that story happened. I was like, oh, shit, what happened? And he was like, there were a few of us there. It wasn't just your uncle. It was a few of us.
Yeah.
And they came out and they had guns and we beat the shit out of them and then took all of our stuff and because they threatened us. So they were all Vietnam vets. I was like, you picked the worst people.
So the guys with no guns beat up the guys with guns
Yes.
because they were all former vets. And they're like, oh, we've seen worse than this.
Yeah,
Oh,
they survived some of the hairiest stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's why I didn't get told that story." I was like, but they were like, "Yeah, we just beat the shit and then got in the car and left."
Yeah.
And I was like, "So Deliverance it's a documentary, is what you're telling me?" Like, by the time that was the best. So I've been playing with poker with my dad and uncle since I was 8, and we'd sit around the table, and I loved telling the story. They would tell stories, and then all of a sudden at the end, Dad would go, "Don't tell your mama." Like that's how every story ended about going to strip clubs. And
Yep.
one of these days, I'm going to record all of those stories so I have a record of it before I start forgetting them. But I'm never going to release that episode.
Well, my friend Tim Coleman says if you don't start on it now, you'll never get to
Yeah,
it. So
I
you
need to-
gotta,
I need to sit-
at least start.
There's some wild stories about
Yeah.
them when they were younger. Okay, so you're in high school.
Sure.
So you're prepping to.
So high school performing arts, they're doing one of the big musicals, right? I went to an all-boys high school, so they would put on these musicals, but they would get girls from the all-girls high school down the road to play the females. And they needed, I was a freshman, and I think it was MAME they were going to do.
Yeah.
So they picked all of the shorter kids, and I guess, those of us hadn't had our growth spurts, and we looked prepubescent. And I certainly did. And they dragged us all down to whatever room it was and had us audition to be Patrick Dennis in MAME. And I was so bad, I didn't, nothing. One of my other classmates got the part, but I couldn't sing and I couldn't dance. And I felt like a real failure at that. So, but I became mildly obsessed with it because I couldn't do it. So I became president of the instructional TV club. And we had TV cameras and things, bulky TV cameras.
Oh, yeah.
So I would film the rehearsals for whatever the next musical was like, hello, as I'm older, a couple of years older, and I have access to this stuff. I'm like, well, I can watch the girls rehearse at least with my TV cameras. And I had this big dream of how we were going to show it. And of course, I'd bitten off more than we could chew in that. And also I became editor of the school newspaper in junior year because I was assistant editor in junior year, but whatever, the editor did something to screw up, and it got it taken away from him halfway through the school year, and I got promoted early. So for a year and a half, I'm editor of the paper, president of the TV club. So I've kind of gone that route, the media route, rather than the performing arts route.
So in doing that, was that what you were thinking you would do when you got to college? Was there a track you thought you were on?
I was, but I made a massive mistake in life, as we all do. And
just one? Come on.
Oh, multiple. I mean, but this one in particular was I scored too high. My massive mistake was I scored higher on math than on verbal in my SATs, which, was that's a fluke maybe. Well, next thing you know, I'm railroaded into a scholarship to be a math major, an ROTC scholarship, Naval ROTC scholarship to be a math major, but I also signed up for these interdisciplinary honors classes. And I was so miserable so fast. I didn't understand calculus. I mean, all I remember, the only thing I can tell you about the calculus class is the ugly comb over that the teacher had and how it would flop once he got going writing on the blackboard. I didn't understand any of calculus.
Yeah.
And then I'm in this interdisciplinary honors class, and I'm looking around trying to figure out, I understand. I mean, I'm mildly interested maybe in Herodotus, but the rest of the Greek stuff was all Greek to me. I don't care.
Yeah.
I hated it. And next thing you know, I find myself gravitating to the campus radio station.
Okay.
And they call me the Rock and Rotzi because I was learning how to be a radio DJ. I was terrible, but I was making mistakes. But it didn't matter. I was learning how to do it. And then I started gravitating toward the student newspaper because they came in. It was right across the hall. The radio station and the newspaper were across the hall from each other in the student union. And they needed somebody to do something. And I started writing articles for the student newspaper. And they started calling me Front Page Frank because it seemed like every story I wrote, they're like, well, I guess we got to put this on the front page.
Yeah.
Because I was getting scoops on, things.
Yeah.
Just from being an extrovert and talking to people, when they had built a new student center and I'm talking to the guy who's running it on a rainy night and there's water coming in. He's like, oh, yeah, all new buildings leak. And that becomes the headline. All buildings leak, says head of student center. My name on the byline, So anyway, that went horribly awry. My father was furious.
Yeah.
Because when he found out that I was doing newspaper and radio and he tried to steer me away from it.
No.
So scholarship went away, interdisciplinary honors went away, calculus went away, all those things went away.
But it was like a light bulb once you got in there. Where it's like,
I basically came home and worked in got a job. My parents, at the same time as all this is happening, my family is moving from New York to the Washington, D.C. suburbs.
Okay.
My dad has changed jobs. He's left the PR firm and taken a job with a lobbying group, basically doing public affairs and public relations for a lobbying company in Washington, D.C. And so I had got a summer job at a performing arts center called Wolf Trap. It's Wolf Trap Farm Park for the performing arts. It's a national park and has this huge theater.
Huh.
And if you watch PBS a lot, you'll see Live at Wolf Trap.
Okay.
So, and stuff like that. But anyway, they would have big name acts and a big outdoor shed, a barn. Not literally a barn because they now have a literal barn that they also perform in.
Okay.
But this outdoor shed that's got the lawn seating in the back. It's kind of like Tanglewood in Massachusetts, but it's got the covered seating underneath. And they would have symphonies and operas, and they would have rock and roll and oldies and ballet and just everything.
Okay.
Well, I got a job working in the box office and this summer after my failed freshman year and took to it well. Ended up working there for a couple of years until ultimately the place burned down. And I got a job in a bank as a bank teller because I had done that. Actually, I had one summer I worked as a bank teller in downtown Manhattan. I would take a train downtown to Manhattan and go be a bank teller at 18 years old. And it was a summer there was a rash of bank robberies that summer. They were all warning us of what to do if we got robbed. But this bank was on the second floor, so it was unlikely that we would get robbed because it wasn't an easy getaway.
Yeah. Unless you were a pole vaulter.
Yeah. So they took extra precautions. They would lock a door that they wouldn't normally lock, and we were all trained on what to do if we got robbed. And there'd be bait money. You make sure you give them the bait money. Make sure you trigger the silent alarm. Make sure you give them the die pack if you can. All these things. So I went back to bank telling after Wolf Trap burned down, and people in the drive-through window would say, "You should be on the radio," because I'm talking through that microphone, and they could understand me.
So when you were the bank teller, you were just like, "This is what I'm doing right now." Were you trying to pursue anything else in the
I started
after hours?
I started figuring I got to get my college career sorted out. So I took some classes at the community college, and one of the classes I took was broadcast engineering, an intro to broadcast engineering. So it was really super basic. Like this is what AM means. This is what FM means. I couldn't fix anything, but it gave you the theory of how broadcasting works and the basic idea of this. When you are faced with a microphone and a mixing board and a transmitter, and it's something they can't hear you, follow the path. This is how we solve that problem. Anyway, so very basic stuff, but that got me back on track. And then I transferred to George Mason University, which is a regular college as opposed to a community college, but all those credits transferred. And I became a communications major and just went with it to the point where I had a speech communications. No, maybe it was a public communications and public policy class, like a 300 or 400 level class. And one of the assignments is find a lobby group, a public affairs, public relations of a lobby group, and write a paper describing, what they do and how they do it. And I'm on the first day, I'm sitting there going, oh no, this assignment, the teacher doesn't know this, but this assignment is to basically shadow my father and take your son to work day. And, I've been assigned to write a project about what my dad does for a living. And he and I are not on great terms because I've,
eschewed math.
Yeah, I've blown everything. I've gone into the career that he told me not to go into.
Right.
I'm actively studying to go into that, and working at the campus radio station and doing all the things. And I had to go to him and say, Dad, I got this assignment, and I need to come down to where you work, and I need to just study it. And it was like, great. And that kind of fixed our relationship, which was good because he was dead within the year. Oh. So that was a blessing.
Yeah.
So I went down to his office and I interviewed all his coworkers and I wrote the story, the paper. They gave me, anything. You're Frank's son. You're Frank Jr. You can have anything you want. You want access to, here's white papers that we've written. Here's all of the stuff that we've released to the news media for the past however long you want, whatever you need.
Wow.
You have access to anything you want.
Yeah.
And so I got an A on the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't have asked. The guy's like, this is perfect, because he wanted something that was involved in public policy. It was literally a lobby group and this is the PR firm for it. Yeah. So boom,
You had all the information
right at my fingertips.
Like, this is the most detailed research.
So I was right at and it got my dad back, and my dad and I back on decent terms, which I'm happy about because, as I mentioned, he died shortly thereafter, unexpectedly. And that, so I at least had that to go with. And even to the point where I picked up a part-time job driving the AAA public service vehicle for an easy listening station called WEZR. And I would drive around the Capitol Beltway looking for people who had run out of gas or had a flat tire or their car was off to the side of the road. And I got trained by AAA on how to drive the Jeep, because it was stick shift and I didn't know how. $30,000 Jeep, and I'm during the parking lot of AAA, and some guy is teaching me how to drive stick. And if I don't figure it out that day, I lose the job. So I learned fast, right? And then I would jumpstart cars and change a tire or two, but mostly I would just tell people get in, and I'd drive them to a gas station nearby and let them sort it out, let a tow truck come do it. But anyway, I've got this thing, and my dad had tickets to a Washington Redskins game. And the people at the radio station are like, take the Jeep to the Redskins game and park it in a highly visible spot.
Oh, my God.
Because we'll get more listeners that way. And so that was kind of cool, And that was maybe December of 82, and my dad died in January of 83.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So it was... So you were in school getting the...
At George Mason.
Getting the paperwork to say, yes, I can do this, while also doing the... grunt work to be able to do this.
Yeah, one of the things I figured out at that point in my life, having been, like I said, a box office clerk at Wolf Trap, which I enjoyed, but it was very much like bank tellering. You're working the window, you're selling tickets, you're dealing with money, and also dealing with the will. I was an expert at the will call window. I always got assigned to will call. And I thought, why don't you trust me with the money? And the boss was like, no, not everyone can do will call. It's a special, weird talent.
Okay.
Because someone would come up to the window and their name was started with an F, and they're not in the box.
Yeah.
Well, whatever, you figure out what their name is, and then you go look in the box. You go walk down 2 windows to where the letter S box is, and they're misfiled because over the phone, when they spelled their name,
Yeah.
you know, F blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
The clerk heard S blah blah blah. And
Okay.
So they're, you know, so that came to me kind of intuitively that all of the misspellings, they would say their name, and I'd hear all the possible misspellings.
Yeah.
And I'd find their tickets, and that fixed the problem. So that I would be in will call all the time. Well, anyway, but it was like being in a bank, and being in a bank, I was good at that. I mean, I had a perfect settlement record. I never was a penny over or a penny under. It was just,
Yeah.
I mean, how hard is it?
Yeah.
You know, you just do it. So
You'd be amazed the amount of times I counted drawers at Taco Bell.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it would be plus or minus. And sometimes it would be like dollars. And it's
Not
like,
to throw my wife under the bus, but there was a time when she also worked at Wolf Trap, not at the same time as me, but ultimately that's the reason we met. Even though it wasn't long story, but she cried one time because she couldn't get her drawer to balance, and they had to figure it out. Ultimately, they did, and it happened at every bank I worked. Something would go wrong, or even at Baskin Robbins, something would go awry, and somebody would get upset. But it wasn't me. I wasn't the problem. I was the fixer.
yeah.
So
Okay.
anyway, now I want to do radio, and I learned while at George Mason that I should at that point only take career-related part-time jobs,
Okay.
and it became a mission of mine to only work
In the field.
And sometimes it was maybe stretching it like a wedding DJ.
Okay.
I counted editing videotape for a TV consulting firm called McHugh & Hoffman. Maybe I'm going to go into television. I don't know, but I'm going to learn to edit videotape on their equipment and do that as a part-time job. So all these other little things, you know, working at a bankrupt AM radio station, that's all of those, whatever it is I did, I felt like it was getting me toward my ultimate goal of broadcasting.
Building experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're working at all those radio stations, still living in DC. Do you have something that you think was like, this is my first big break? This was where it elevated me to what was the thing that brought
at
to
the
you
George
next
at the
level?
campus station at George Mason, we didn't have listeners really. It was what's called a carrier current station. So they would use the electrical wiring of the dorms was the antenna, and they would put these little low-power transmitters and connect them to the electricity at each of the dorms. And that's how we were allegedly going to be heard.
Okay.
And, you know, maybe somebody would tune in if, like, you know, you were going to be on and you knew you had a friend in the dorm and they might tune in to listen to their friend. But it was AM.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, come on. We probably had more listeners on a speaker in the Rathskeller, which they would often turn off. But, you know, if the music was not good. But we'd probably have more listeners just ambiently in the Rathskeller of the Student Union than we did over the carrier current. But I pretended it was full-on big-time top 40, right? You know, and I'm interested in playing songs that are popular. And then you have that ultimate battle with somebody else who wants to educate the audience by playing obscure songs. And some of the ones that he picked, I'm sure, turned into hits. I think that's how I first heard of probably like Depeche Mode or REM or some of those bands. But I'm like, no, we're just going to play the hits. You know, give me that. Where's that Olivia Newton-John album and the Michael Jackson album and Hall & Oates? I
was going to ask, like, were you? It was interesting to hear you talk about how listening to kind of classical and opera and all that. One of my questions was, were you a music nerd before you got into radio?
No.
And that is a no.
That's a hard no. Hard no. In fact, I didn't even like. I turned on. Listen, my father's love of opera and classical turned me off to it until much later in life when I realized he was right. And I really here in Knoxville, and I started going to the symphony and the opera. I'm like, oh, this is nice. I like this, and it's soothing to me. Maybe it's soothing to me because it triggers those ancient memories of home. But
my entry into classical is a very weird one, kind of in that same vein. It's because I grew up where my dad listened to everything, but my mom listened to like Barbra Streisand, Anita Baker, Celine Dion, like all of that stuff. So then when I started listening to like movie scores and stuff like
yes,
that.
yes.
That's how I got into it. And
That's the new classical. That's the contemporary classical, if you will.
And then it finally dawned on me. I was like, oh yeah, all of this is because I was listening to symphony-backed music that Mom listened to from B97.5.
Yeah, and it's just got that lush sound to it that you can tell with the real strings and instead of the synth strings. Yeah.
That I knew who Nelson Riddle was when I was in high school. But I had it was so wild. I had a science teacher, Mr. Bailey, that my freshman year, he just glommed onto me because I was big and I played football, but I was a smart kid. And he was a former football player and he wrestled, but he was also like this super smart science teacher. And for some reason, he and I got talking about classical music scores, movie scores. And it turns out he had sung opera when he was in school, like all this crazy stuff. And then, what was it? I had the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves score because the Bryan Adams song was on there, but I loved the music from it. And there was one point where he was like, let me give you some stuff. So he would bring me CDs to listen to, like classical and opera. And then I brought that to him, and he was like a week later, he brought it back to me. He was like, this was really good. He was like, my wife and I sat down and listened to this.
Oh, nice.
And I literally went, you just sat down and listened to this? He was like, yeah. I was like, you weren't doing anything else? He's like, no. I was like, well, that's weird to me. To me, it blew my mind because I'm always like, oh, I'm playing video games or I'm doing something else. But he's like, no, you can do that. Just do that.
I'm at the point where I can't listen to music recreationally anymore because it makes me think too hard about every other thing. And it might be, it's very, if I listen to another radio station or listen to any radio station, all I'm thinking about is the mechanics of how the radio station is working.
Right.
Why is that song playing? Why is that jingle in between it? Why is the DJ talking?
Yeah.
Why is everything happening? That's all because to me obviously I've worked in radio for 40 years.
Yeah.
So that's all I can think of when I'm listening to radio. Even whether it's classical or it doesn't matter. Occasionally if I'm at a symphony concert and I'm trapped in the room and there's nothing else you can do except sit there and enjoy the music, then maybe I can relax and enjoy the music. But under most circumstances, like I've got access to any song in the world on the internet.
Yeah.
So I don't listen to any of them.
Oh my God.
It's too much. There's too many to choose from.
Yeah.
Like, how do I decide what would be the perfect song to listen to right now? I don't know.
See, I've got too much ADHD to where if I think of a song, it's almost like I have to listen to it because otherwise it's just like, don't forget that song, don't forget that song.
I have been freaked out lately by the middles of songs.
Okay.
I'll put on, the station where I'm working, which is 104.9 Lake FM, right? So I'll put that on because I want to make sure, I want to hear myself mainly to see if everything worked.
Right.
Because with the technology nowadays, it's not like you're walking into the transmitter building and turning the knobs and flipping the switch. And, I want to hear, so you send in your voice tracks and they're supposed to play perfectly over the part of the song. And I want to make sure it sounds right. Anyway, I'm listening to it, waiting for my talk break to come on, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I don't know this until they get to the end of the song because I realize I've never heard the middle of whatever song that was. Oh. And it's like some Robert Palmer song from the 70s or 80s that I've played on the radio
oh my God.
hundreds of times.
So I'm that way with TikTok to where I have heard 15-second chunks of songs to where I was listening to, I was in It's Also Yummy Cafe, love Kim.
Yes.
And I'm sitting in there, and I'm like, I think this is, now I'm on blank on his name. Watermelon Sugar is the name of the song. It's one of the kids from One Direction, Harry Styles. And I was just like, I think this is that song. I've only heard 15 seconds of this song on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a very boring song. Like I got to a part, I was like, oh no, I'm good. I don't need to hear this song.
Yeah, I realized I've talked over the intro to whatever song it was. I've waited for the outro to get to a certain point. I'm listening for like a cue at the outro, and then I'm waiting to hear that whatever that lyric is, so he finishes the train of thought.
Yeah.
So I don't fade it out too early or too late, and then boom, you hit the button to start the next song. So I know those 5 seconds at the end and in the 7 or 8 seconds at the beginning, and that's my And I know the hook of the song, da 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 da, whatever it goes, Doctor Doctor, Simply Irresistible, whichever one it is, I don't know. But there was a part in the middle. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know this.
That I think Pardo was the first person I ever heard give a label to hitting the post.
Oh,
I
sure.
didn't know the technical term.
Oh, that's
I'd
an
always
old
heard it
DJ term.
when I was a kid, and he was like, he had mentioned some radio guy. And he was like, this guy was the greatest at hitting the post, and whomever it was, maybe in Steve Dahl or somebody, where he was like, whoever it was didn't even have to hear the song beforehand.
Yeah,
could just do it on the fly and knew it, and I was like, that's insane to me.
I find that. Especially when I'm working classic hits and playing the songs that I played in 1982 at my first radio job at the AM bankrupt station. So my wife was watching me do it the other day, and I was at Betty Davis Eyes, and I just do it.
Yeah.
And you can see visually now on the computer, you can see my wave file of my voice. And you can see that the Betty Davis Eyes is under it, so they're laying over each other. But it looks to her, she said, well, did you talk on the part where you're allowed to talk is like shaded, it's highlighted.
Yeah.
But I talked past it. And she's like, you missed it. You didn't stop in time. I'm like, no, they have it wrong. I wasn't looking at that. I just was listening.
Yeah.
I know the song.
Yeah.
I could talk on Betty Davis Eyes in my sleep. And then I took off my headphones and I played it for her. And she's like, oh.
Yeah, you hit the post.
I hit the post, even though the post was mismarked on the computer file that I was using.
Although when I was a kid and I would record stuff off the radio station, that would drive me nuts. I was like, hey, I just want to record the song. I don't need to hear you talk.
Well, that's a good point, because most of the times the reason we talk over the intros is because you're trying to keep the listener from tuning out. You're trying to say and here's another technical term for you to go with hitting the post: crush and roll.
Crush and roll.
So when if you are a crush and roll jock, and I am, you hold back and try not to say anything. And you can break the rule when the circumstances permit, and I do break the rule when it needs to be. But for the most part, songs fading out, I don't say anything. And then when it comes time, I start the next song and let the first note of that song play, crushing it, and then I roll over the intro. I crush the button is what that means. You're crushing the start button. And then you roll the intro, and you're subconsciously telling the listener, we are not stopping for a commercial. We are still in the music sweep.
Okay.
That's why we do it.
Okay.
Not to irritate you, not to make it impossible for you to record the song, but it's to get you to listen longer. And that's same with other top 40. You try to subconsciously program people to understand that if we don't like the one song that's on, that I will probably like the next song.
Okay.
The theory is that if the audience likes 2 out of the 3 songs at any given time, they'll stick with you through the one they don't like to hear the 2 that they do.
It is weird growing up in a time where you would have to stick around to hear what the song was. And then
backselling it?
Yeah, and then getting to the point with like WDVX where they would start publishing their playlists and set lists, to where then it was like in the early internet days where it was like, okay, I like that song, but I had to get out of the car, so I need to remember to go back and look through and try and figure out which one it was.
And now you can just Shazam it, or you don't even need Shazam, because Siri, Apple bought Shazam.
Oh, did they?
Siri does. You can Shazam just using Siri.
So even today, it's like I could mention some band and you'd be like, nope, don't know them. Ish.
There's a good chance Itch is the name of a band.
No, Ish.
Ish. Oh, Ish is the name of a band.
No.
It depends. I mean, I'm not a hermit.
Yeah.
I'm aware of things, and it depends on the era, because I worked in top 40 radio at the beginning of my career and through the 80s into the early 90s, and then I worked at a hip hop station for a couple of years.
Okay. What year was that? Because I'm curious.
That was 92 and 93.
Oh, so right at the beginning of gangster rap.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how I met Tupac.
You met
He came by the radio station to promote this movie that he was in, Poetic Justice.
Poetic Justice with Janet Jackson.
I need to find the autographed picture I have of Tupac, because in the move, it got packed away somewhere.
So, spoiler alert, I do have a question on my list that just says celebrity encounters.
Oh,
so we'll get to that eventually.
Sure. But so I worked at this hip hop station, but I was supposed to be on the comedy morning show. Jay Thomas
Yeah.
was a well-known actor, radio DJ, comedian. I listened to him in New York as a kid.
I remember Murphy Brown.
Yeah, he
is
was on
Murphy
Murphy Brown.
and
Then
also my dad was a ginormous Letterman fan.
yes,
So the Lone Ranger story and throwing the
Brilliant.
football at the meatball, like
brilliant stuff.
which anybody listening who doesn't know any of that says, I don't know what any of that you just said.
Which is
meant.
why when he threw a water cup at me, I was lucky that it missed.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah,
That's all
but
good, too.
so I worked for Jay for a
Yeah.
couple of years, and then ended up at the world's premier alternative rock station, which is KROQ.
K-Rock, yeah.
Was there for 3 years, and then I was at a classic rock station, KLOS, a famous classic rock station,
Yeah.
KLOS, for 3 years. So during that period of the '90s, I was not exposed to a lot of pop top 40 music. I'm hearing,
Okay.
hip hop, alternative rock,
Right.
classic rock, and then. So I got caught. I missed out on a lot of that.
Okay.
Then when I moved to Knoxville, I worked in what's called Adult Album Alternative, which was 100.3 The River.
Oh,
So that was, I guess Jason Mraz and Maroon 5 were considered cutting edge at the time.
So I
But,
will say-
Dave Matthews, yeah,
the river exposed me. This would have been
Jack Johnson.
02,
That's when I
01
moved
to
here.
03.
02 is when I moved here.
So there are musicians. Oh, there are musicians that like Guster. I first heard
Mm-hmm.
on there. There's this guy John Eddy
Yeah,
that I first heard on there. They would play Scott Miller, which
Yep.
blew my mind. Like,
and the Commonwealth.
yeah, and
Yeah, absolutely.
there were a lot of people like Tori Amos made a big comeback around that time, and they would play her.
Yes.
So there was a lot of stuff I got exposed to by listening to The River because it wasn't butt rock,
Yeah.
which was what was being played on NFC.
Yep.
WNFC 94.3, whatever. It wasn't that stuff, the new metal stuff. It was something different, like
Yeah.
Sarah Bareilles
Exactly.
and all that stuff.
So that's why they called it Adult Album
Yeah.
Alternative. AAA was the name.
because I
of the
remember
format.
then it changed the country right after that.
Multiple things happened.
Yeah.
And we can go down that rabbit hole
Okay,
if you
well,
want.
let's-
But
we'll-
then I worked in an oldie station
Yeah.
for a year and a half, and then I got in 2005. I came back to the world of top 40.
Okay.
So I had some catching up to do on early 2000s top 40,
Okay.
late 90s, early 2000s that we were still playing as recurrents, which
Okay.
would be a lot of probably some Britney and Christina Aguilera and whatever.
NSYNC, Backstreet.
Yeah, I mean, and a little bit of not so much 90s, but some of this stuff,
Oh, okay.
2000 stuff,
Okay.
and then all the new stuff that came out after that. And I was at that station for 8 years, and then moved down the hall to work back to go jump back to oldies again.
Okay.
But I was still I'm in the building where you've got Hot 104.5 and Star 102.1, and so you're aware of what's going on musically because your friends work at these other stations.
Okay.
And then once I left that job, or once that job left me, it was more accurate. They changed formats and eliminated live DJs and local DJs.
Yeah.
I then kind of withdrew from it a little bit because the pandemic's happening at this point. We're in the lockdown. During the most of the lockdown, I was considered an essential employee. So I went out of the house, went to work every day, and I felt fairly normal. I didn't mind
Yeah.
it. And then it's funny because as things eased up, I lost the job. They eliminated my position, and now I'm working from home all the time, and I'm experiencing it in a out of sync with everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm having the COVID-19 pounds have come back. Because I'm sitting at home and not
Yeah.
getting out as much as I used to, and it's weird for me
Yeah.
to spend so much time at home. I'll go days without turning on my car.
Yeah. So I had that working for myself for 2.5 years during the I've been, in fact, this coming week I will hit 6 years of doing Feral Giant. So
Well, kudos to you. Congratulations.
thank you. But yeah, 2.5 years of sitting at the house and trying to find work and all that stuff. Yeah, it was very weird, very surreal. But okay, so your music knowledge sounds like it will be randomly spotty. Like,
Yeah.
like all of a sudden you'll pull like a 50 Cent song from 2004 because it was
Candy Shop.
Yeah. Exactly. Holy crap! And then you'll be Imagine Dragons or something.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's kind of all over the place. Okay.
Yeah, and it's fine. Again, that's the thing about radio. But my interest in radio always goes back to Bob and Ray. Always
Yeah.
goes back to working on these morning shows, all these different stations where I worked,
Yeah.
whether it was WAVA in Washington for 8 years, Power 106 in LA, K-Rock in LA, KLOS in LA, and even here in Knoxville on Star and The River and the Oldie
Yeah.
station. It was all about the morning show. And my job, you're aware of the music because you play it when you're not talking,
Right.
but while it's playing, we're talking about the next thing we're going to say on the air, or who's going to go next, whose turn is it to tell their story, or what's the game we're going to do, what's the contest we're going to do. So you're not really paying attention to the songs. That's filler.
Okay.
So your whole brain becomes flipped, and in reality, for the listener, the music is why you listen. The
Yeah.
DJs are filler. For us, we are the content. The music is filler.
Yeah.
It's opposite. Although the latest survey from somebody, they have this bar graph or this chart that shows why do people listen to radio, and discovery of new music or just listening to music has slowly gone down, and DJs and personalities has not gone up, skyrocketed, but maintained
Yeah.
to the point and gone up maybe slightly to they've crisscrossed.
Huh.
So now it always was music number one, DJs number two. Now, for the past several times they've done this survey, so maybe 2 years, it's flipped with DJs or personalities are the reason you listen.
Yeah.
And that's not so much that the personalities are better, because sadly there are fewer of us.
Yeah.
It's the same old, who is it? It's Bobby Bones on every city in America. It's pick another major, all these
Charlemagne the God. Yeah.
all these syndicated shows rather that are in every city in America.
Yeah.
Doing the same old
Bob
same
and
old.
Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what's changed is it's much easier to discover new music and listen to music on the internet. So you're not going to radio because you've got to hear the song. Like you said, you get a song in your head. You used to be able to. What would you do in the past? You turn on the station that you knew would play it every few hours, waiting for it to come on. Now, you don't need that. Just instant gratification. Yep. You find the song you want, and if you're going to put on the radio, it's more likely to keep you company.
Yeah.
It's to maybe not think about what the next song is going to be, or be literally interested in what they're talking, which is also the rise of podcasting. As they eliminate shows like this from radio.
Yeah.
This is very much like the old WOR talk
100%.
shows that I would have listened to, my parents would have listened to.
Yeah.
You and I having this nice conversation about any number of things. The podcast today is like those old talk shows. So there's new ways to find all of that. But the rise of podcasting is because radio continually shoots itself in the foot by eliminating the stuff that makes it unique.
Although I will say that I feel like I am the opposite in that I try to beat the algorithm, because all the algorithm that feeds me the music that they think I like, to where I will actually turn on UTK, DVX, WOT to hear maybe not the personality, but what those people have picked.
Yeah.
To hear outside of my standard stream of music.
And
So
those stations are interesting. You mentioned they're all non-coms.
Yeah.
So, and they will curate the music in a different way than I do. I mean, I don't really even pick my own songs on Lake FM, but they always program more songs than fit in the hour. So I have to delete something.
Yeah.
I have to delete 1 or 2 songs every hour just to make that fit.
Yeah.
And I can see the pattern. It's a 70 song, 80 song, 70 song, 60 song, 80 song, 90 song. I mean, I know by heart the rotation that they want in each hour. So when I'm choosing which ones to delete, I'm not just randomly picking one. I'm looking at where it fits into the whole hour, and finding the one that's the right length of time that I can to cut, and also to make sure that the flow is. I'm not going to play the 60 song and the 90 song back to back, because that's jarring.
Yeah.
They deliberately want to. It goes the 60 song, then the 70 song, then the 80 song, then the 90 song.
Yeah.
So that just to make it sound more. It's all subconscious, but there's certain theories in how they program the station. Yeah.
I'm somebody who's done mixtapes to mix CDs I had a radio show. There was a friend of mine who does motion graphics and animation, And it hit the pandemic, and he didn't have any work, so he started an online radio station, Raucous Radio. And I had a show on there. He liked the podcast, so he was like, I want you to do a show. And so I figured out what I want to do. It was called Porch Sitting.
Yeah.
And it was music that you would sit out on your porch and listen to.
That's nice.
And then I would have people on and interview them, like, what was your favorite first album? What was, what was your favorite show? What was the song that made you stand up? All these standard kind of questions, and just talk to them about music. Because he was like, I think the interview portion is the important part.
Yeah.
Because the other part, people will tune in and listen to music, but it will be background.
Right.
Whereas if you actually have people on,
Foreground.
they'll be more interested.
Yeah, and that was my job at all these radio stations, was to create foreground content that you would sit in your driveway, and NPR talks about the driveway moment, where the story is so interesting that you can't turn off the car. But that's real. That's every commercial station is trying to do that also. Yeah.
Before I'm gonna hang up the phone on this, so we're going to talk about other people that you worked with, but I want to stop talking about the music part. I want to. So do you catch crap from somebody like Bean, who's a giant music nerd, and he's like, how do you not know this song? Like, does he give you a hard time about stuff like that?
Well, he's always been a fan of new music discovery. Even on his podcast, Cup of Tea and a Chat, they have a feature every Friday where he and Allie both add a song to the playlist.
Okay.
So they're always bringing a new song, and that was on K-Rock. It was always about discovery of new music and new artists, and that's when K-Rock started to suffer, is because they basically turned into a classic rock station, even though their quote-unquote classic rock was the grunge sound of the 90s. And they got stuck into the early 2000s. They got stuck playing the same, whether it was Red Hot Chili Peppers or Nirvana or Pearl Jam, or then even into Metallica and System of a Down. There's certain bands that just became K-Rock standards. Originally, K-Rock was about whether it was Van Halen, who was unknown at the time, or the Go-Go's, who were unknown. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
The style of music, it was about putting this new sound on.
Yeah.
And so he'll have no problem with sending me a playlist and saying, here's some stuff you might want to listen to, or here's some things. Yeah. He gets it. He understands that my comedy is my music.
Okay.
For a lot of people grew up listening to music, and it influenced them greatly. I grew up being interested in comedy, and would much rather than listen to an album or watch a concert, I would rather watch a comedian. So if you want to get into these old shows that, Bob Hope, I would watch as a kid. I wanted to I made my parents take me to a Bob Hope show when I was young, rather than a music concert, and I wanted to see the Bob Hope on stage doing a performance. And comedy albums are. I had memorized one of the Steve Martin albums when I was in high school.
Yeah,
that was much more influential to me, and that's my mindset. As I think of, I can listen to comedy recreationally. I mean, I'll watch on. I don't know what I was watching. I'm watching a Nate Bargatze special on Netflix. Yeah, I watched a Bill Burr special on Netflix. I watched Ricky Gervais. I mean, whatever. Those are the ones that I remember from most recently, but it doesn't matter. That interests me more than a music concert.
So at the same time, my parents were huge comedy nerds.
Good.
And HBO would show comedy specials on New Year's Eve, and they would put in a VHS tape and record them while they went and partied. So I, again, got to experience like Robin Williams when I was a kid.
Yes. I went to see the Robin Williams comedy show in a theater. Whatever it was, him in the red shirt and the suspenders.
Reality, what a concept.
Yes, maybe what I'm thinking of the Mork costume, but whatever he wore in that show, they released it as a movie. In the theaters, and I went to see it. Yeah.
So his live at the Met, I still almost have memorized word for word. Wow. I've seen it so many times, and the sad part is the first tape I ever bought for myself was the He Who Shall Not Be Named, who is a pudding enthusiast, that I have that best of tape.
That stuff was brilliant. I used to check those records out of the library.
Yeah.
His and Woody Allen, which I guess you can't say him either. But I mean, I would listen to those I would go to the public library. I would take out comedy albums.
I can do every bit on the best of tape.
Yeah.
I can jump into the middle. I can start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like I watched the W. Kamau Bell documentary about We Need to Talk About Cosby.
Yeah.
And there were bits that came up and I was like, I can still do this. And I have not listened to that man in 10 years
When I
or
was
something.
first married and we had cable,
Yeah.
by mistake, didn't install our cable correctly, or they didn't do it. And
Yeah.
I went and complained at the cable company,
Yeah.
and they just gave me a box to shut me up. They just grabbed one off the shelf
That's
and just
awesome.
said, "Here, leave," because they were supposed to come. My wife was pregnant, and she needed to watch something, and I'm at my wit's end, right?
Yeah.
And the cable company was within walking distance of our cheapo rent-controlled apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm like, "You got to help me. This is I can't."
Yeah.
And they just gave me a box. Well, I take it home, and they gave me one that got Cinemax by mistake. I didn't
Okay.
pay for Cinemax,
Yeah.
but this is the box they gave me, and it had the buttons on the top.
Yeah.
Not
Oh,
a
yeah.
remote. You had to physically push the button on the
Oh,
top
yeah.
and change from the top tier to the bottom tier. Well, the Bill Cosby one
Himself.
whatever, was on so often that the bad part about Dad is Great, Made Us Chocolate Cake was like playing in
Yeah.
our house pretty much every day
Yeah.
for the 2 years that we lived there.
Yeah. It's... Yeah.
So I mean,
I can't
it's
get
a tough,
into...
It's a tough angle because the same thing with Woody Allen is if
Yeah.
you go back and listen to his original stand-up, you're like, is this the same guy?
Yeah.
It's so different and interesting and doesn't remind you of what we think of Woody Allen
Yeah.
in now. He did the brilliant bit about the moose, and it blew my mind,
Yeah.
because my father was a member of the athletic club mentioned at the end of the moose bit, which, and the whole punchline is that this athletic club is restricted and Jews can't get in. And I'm like, what? My dad's best friend is Harvey Katz. How is this possible that we went to a country club that doesn't allow Jewish people?
Yeah.
This is mind blowing to me. How is this possible?
Well, and it's going to church every week with my grandmother and then hearing the Noah bit from
Yes.
it's like, oh my God, it's this stuff I'm reading about every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And now it's coming to life and this guy talking about Noah.
My dad would make sure that we went to a sukkah at Harvey Katz's house because we
nice.
needed to experience how Jewish people live in the day-to-day lives,
Okay, so we get into radio, and something that seems like is consistent is a lot of people in the world of radio move around a lot. And it kind of sounds like you moved around a lot.
Less than most of my radio friends,
Okay.
but
Is that kind of expected? Like,
consolidation and the way radio is now has changed things. But in the old days, when there were limits on how many stations a company could own, there were thousands of radio companies, thousands of companies that you could go work. So if something went south in your current job, if it went badly, if you got fired or you quit in a huff or any number of things went, the ratings were bad, you could still get a fresh start working at a new company in a new city.
okay.
And nowadays, if things go bad with company X, or the company that eliminated my position most recently, they've got stations all over the country. I can't work for any of them. I can't go to Honolulu and work for that company. It's not possible.
Yeah.
I'm not eligible for rehire. I was eliminated. Goodbye.
They're a big
I got a
corporation.
nice review. They called and gave me a recommendation. They called Channel 6 and gave me a glowing recommendation if I was trying to do something over there. I was a model employee, but this company didn't want me anymore.
Yeah.
And that was a thing of upper management, and not even local management. It was the corporation at HQ decided
Yeah.
out that we're going to get rid of the old and in with the new,
Yeah.
and that's the way it works. So, yeah.
But back in the day, was there...
So you could move. Yep. I worked for a DJ named Don Geronimo, who was legendary for moving from job to job, station to station, and many times it was because he did or said something too outrageous, or whatever. but when he finally, in fact, he's worked in D.C., I think, on 3 different, he keeps coming back to D.C.
Wow. Okay.
After moving and going to Chicago or going to Sacramento or wherever else he went. I can't even think of all the places. But, he's got a name recognition in town, and somebody's willing to take a chance on him. And now that he's older and he's a little more settled, it's a good move. He gets, people are listening to him.
Yeah.
But that was the norm. I only moved really twice.
Okay.
Because I started in radio in the D.C. area.
Mm-hmm.
My family moved from New York to D.C. That was my dad changing jobs.
Right.
So I get started in radio, and I worked in radio from 1982 until 1992 in Washington. So basically I had a 10-year run at that includes college and small town, and 8 years at WAVA. Mm-hmm. They sell the station. The guy who owned it or the company that owned it was Emes, which is the Jewish word for truth. Right?
Okay.
And the guy in charge, Jeff Smulyan, had purchased the Seattle Mariners. And it was a boondoggle. It went badly. So he starts selling off his great radio stations that he bought from Doubleday. So I actually started working for Doubleday.
I didn't realize Doubleday owned radio stations.
I worked for Doubleday, and they owned the station in New York that played the Mets, ironically.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's ironic or not, because Doubleday, I think of baseball, Abner Doubleday. And WLOL in Minnesota, and WAVA in Washington, and a few others.
There's a WLOL.
There used to be.
That sounds like a
joke.
Yeah, a podcast.
But in those days, it stood for, there was no LOL, laugh out loud. It stood for Land of Lakes.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
WLOL, Minneapolis. So anyway, Smulyan and Emes, they sell off WLOL. They sell off WAVA. They kept a few maybe, but they kept consolidating and getting rid of stations, which is too bad. Except that they told me, "Hey, pretty much everybody's fired. Don't tell the others, but you can stay if you want to take a job at one of our other stations. So New York's interested in you, and Los Angeles is interested in you." So I flew to New York, and I interviewed, and I flew to L.A., and I interviewed. Both offered me jobs. And I had to choose now. Do I want to go to New York or L.A.? And having grown up in New York, and it wasn't, this would be 1992, and I'd been there in the 70s. And New York in the 70s was not the same as New York in the 90s.
Oh, I've seen another dad film is The Taking of Pelham 123.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of those 70s New York films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the one with
Taxi
the vigilante,
Driver.
Charles Bronson as the vigilante?
Oh, Death Wish.
Yeah. So I just, something about going down to Broadway at 4 a.m. every day. I couldn't wrap my head around it. But in L.A., where I could easily drive to work, park in the garage in the same building, it was a very car-oriented culture, right? And I thought, well, I've never, in L.A., just something about L.A. felt magical to me from all the TV that I watched as a kid. It just felt like I'd been there before, even though I really had only made one brief visit there earlier in my, a few years earlier. I was excited. My friend Bean already lived in L.A. He and I had worked together in Washington, D.C. At WAVA, and he's working at K-Rock. And I'm going to be working with Jay Thomas at Power 106, a guy I watched on TV and used to listen to on the radio at 99X in New York. I'm like, so I took the L.A. option. And then I ended up at L.A. working at multiple different stations. So unusual in that I didn't just leave when Jay Thomas gets fired from Power 106, which is a very long story.
Okay.
I worked there for a few more months with other morning shows, and then the opening for the same job as I was doing, producer of morning shows, I opened at K-Rock. And I think I've told this story multiple times, but there were 3 guys who were finalists for the K-Rock job. This guy named Johnny Vega, who had worked with Rick Dees, or maybe went on to work with Rick Dees, whatever it is he did, and then created what's called a DJ prep sheet. So if you listen to Phil Williams, for example, here in Knoxville, you're hearing him read out loud from Johnny Vega's prep service called the Complete Sheet.
Okay.
Which I signed up for when I worked with Phil, and he has continued the subscription to this day because I recognize it when I hear it.
Yeah.
And it's jokes and spin on the news and blah blah blah, crazy news stories. So Johnny Vega ended up going on to create that prep sheet. The other guy who was a finalist for the job that I got was a fellow named Jimmy Kimmel, who...
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah. And then me. So I get the job, and the program director, Kevin Weatherly, is a little miffed because he wanted them to hire Kimmel because they were buds from having worked together in Phoenix or San Diego or both. And but I've got the job. And when we had had a comedy writer on the show who at the time was Mark Davis, who might be known to some as Richard Cheese. He sings these lounge versions of hardcore rap and rock songs, and it's hilarious.
I know Richard Cheese.
Well, Mark was the comedy writer on the show when I started, but he was
amazing.
Going off to do other things. He had a character called Paul, the 55-year-old intern, who in effect became Richard Cheese. In effect, they're the same.
Okay.
The early version of Richard Cheese was Paul, the 55-year-old intern. And Mark's in his 20s at this point, right? He's now 55, but back then. So he's ready to go and get a job at a comedy service, another comedy service that just cranks out parody songs a la Weird Al Yankovic. Every week they've got to crank out a rock, a country, and a top 40 parody song about something that's in the news. So Mark was going to go make these songs and sing them and send them out all over the country to radio to DJs. So the comedy writer job opens up, and the program director hires Jimmy Kimmel. So now, a few months after I've been hired, they hire Jimmy, and that's the team for a few years. It's Jimmy and I would be hotel roommates when we'd go do shows on the road.
Yeah,
he and I would sit in the office together. So that was the drill. And then I don't even know how I got down that path, but I got the producer job at K-Rock when time came to leave there because they wanted to cut costs and do things. I took a job doing the same thing at KLOS with a morning show called Mark and Brian, and producing their comedy bits, and getting them out and doing who knows what.
I'll go back to Jay Thomas.
Yes.
So you already knew who he was before you went out there.
I mean, I knew who all these people were really because I'm a radio nerd.
Oh, okay.
I had a subscription to Radio and Records magazine that would come mailed to my house, and I would pour through the job openings.
Yeah.
While I worked with Don and Mike at WAVA, because I mean, frankly, the job of being the producer is you are the whipping boy for whatever. The way that I've described the job politely as, you're always setting up the pins, but you never get to go bowling.
Okay.
That's one way to describe it.
Okay.
Another another accurate way to say it is they get all the credit, but you get all the blame. For whatever it is you do, if it goes well, the stars get the credit. If it goes poorly, the producer gets the blame.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably know this from every other industry.
Oh, yeah.
There's always somebody who...
Graphic designer is always the lowest person on the totem pole.
Yeah.
Like you have project managers and marketing people and directors, and it's always the designers are they get paid the least amount of money, and they get expected to just churn and burn as much work as humanly possible.
Yeah.
While other people are watching Sweet 16 at a bar next door. Not that I would... That would be a real thing that happened, but yeah.
So I was looking at Radio and Records all the time.
Yeah.
So I was well aware. In fact, during that time period, you could probably name almost any set of call letters, and I'd have for major cities, and I could tell you probably where they were and who was doing mornings, because that became my baseball card.
Yeah. I was trying to remember who was doing morning here before it was Billy. Because I remember my dad listened to Phil in the morning, every morning growing up.
Phil worked with Colvin Idol.
Colvin Idol, that's who it was.
Yeah.
It was Phil and Colvin Idol, and then Phil and Billy, I think. And so I have been hearing Phil Williams' voice every morning, because Dad would turn the radio on when he was in the bathroom getting ready for work.
When I came here to work with Phil, they wanted an Odd Couple show, so that's the reason I got selected. A consultant in L.A., had been hired to help. He had clients all over the country, but the River 100.3 was his client in Knoxville. Yeah, more water. The 100.3 was his client in Knoxville, and they wanted to do something with the morning show. They had Phil on by himself, and Phil and Billy had always been a thing, so they decided they were going to do an Odd Couple show. So they hire me to be, I don't know if I'm the Felix or if I'm the Oscar, I'm going to guess Felix, just off the top of my head. And so I move here to be Phil's partner. Well, I wanted them to call it Phil and Frank, right?
Yeah.
I thought it had alliteration. Aaron Snuckles, the general manager, said it reminded him of Frickin' Frack, who were a 1940s skating duo. So I don't buy that as an actual excuse. But they went with Phil and Murphy, and I think it's because it had the cadence of Phil and Billy.
Oh, okay. Okay, we're going to go back to L.A. So you're working with Jay Thomas. He gets fired.
I'm actually writing a book, and that story is in the book because it's unbelievable. But I've told it on other podcasts. If you want to look up one called Quitters Never Give Up, which is a Kevin and Bean fan podcast.
Okay.
The basic gist of the story is that Jay started pre-recording the first part of his show, which everyone does today.
I think I remember hearing this.
But it was controversial in 1993. So Jay gets fired, and for pre-taping his show, sues the radio station. I have to do a deposition. It was miserable.
Yeah.
Everything about it was awful, except that I ended up being available when the K-Rock job came calling a few months later.
Was that so? The K-Rock job started out there and then started working with Kevin and Bean.
Kevin and Bean hired me to come work for them at K-Rock.
Okay.
They actually had started there in 1990, and while I was working at WAVA in Washington, D.C., I'm talking to Bean, and they had a producer opening in 91, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But they had done a bit on the air that had gone very badly called Confess Your Crime.
Okay.
And that's a whole chapter of their book about why this bit failed and why it was terrible and why they almost got fired and why there is now a new rule in the FCC that is basically called the Kevin and Bean rule because what they did was not against the rules. But everyone got so pissed about it that they made it against the rules and they wrote it into it's in textbooks and stuff. The basic gist of it was they had a bit called Confess Your Crime, and people call up and say little things they did that they got away with.
Yeah.
Little things they shouldn't have done, but oops, they got away with it. Well, they weren't getting any calls, so they called their friend Sluggo in Phoenix, who was working at KZZP. Kevin and Bean had worked at KZZP in Phoenix. That's how they met.
Yeah.
They got their job doing their first time ever doing mornings at K-Rock, which is amazing. Sluggo's in Phoenix. Sluggo, they get him on the phone and say, hey, we're going on the air live. We don't have any calls for Confess Your Crime. Can you say something?
Oh, God.
Sluggo confesses to a murder.
Of course.
It's all fake.
Yeah.
He just says that he killed somebody, some girl. Well, isn't that outrageous? And then they let, they move on with the show. The rest of the show happens. Well, they don't know this, but off the air, people who have heard this start freaking out, thinking, oh my gosh, maybe this will give me closure. This could be my sister, daughter, mother, aunt, somebody who's been missing. So people start thinking, and then Unsolved Mysteries gets involved.
Oh my God.
And they want to do a story about this unsolved murder that someone's called in and confessed on the radio. So now they're in this lie over their head, and they can't get out of it. They don't know what to do to get out of it.
God.
So ultimately, Unsolved Mysteries exposes it, and they have the tape of Robert Stack going, and turns out Gene Baxter and Kevin Ryder were lying. So they should have gotten fired. They almost got fired. And they had to go, they did some sort of community service restitution.
Yeah.
They had to go appear before the FCC. It wasn't against the rules, it turns out. Now it is. This sort of phone fraud or whatever it was, this hoax, it was called. And this is, meanwhile, I'm negotiating to go work there with Andy Schoen. The program director is Andy Schoen, who went on to be an influential program director at MTV. It was his next job after that.
Wow.
And that's why so many K-Rock people became MTV stars during the 1990s. I'm talking about Louis Largent and Kennedy and
I heard
Carson Daly.
The flip side in that the first time I heard the name K-Rock, I think, was Chris Hardwick, because he had gotten the hosting gig on the dating show or whatever.
I am partly responsible for that.
Oh, really? And then he came on to K-Rock. He is someone that...
I like him a lot.
Okay. I won't say anything.
Well, I haven't talked
used
to him. I haven't talked to him in 30 years.
I used to like him a lot, but there are little things. I hate how he's. This is a weird thing to say. I don't like how he says he grew up in the South, and he keeps because he always used it.
He
as
lived in Memphis briefly, and his father was a professional bowler.
Yeah, but he makes it sound like, well, I understand the South, and he kind of shits on it. And I was like, stop doing that.
Yeah,
stop doing that.
I probably understand more about the South than he does, and I'm a Yankee all
Yeah.
the way.
But I think it's.
I see your point.
There were a few things where I was like, okay, I think I'm
he's
done
swimming
with
in
you.
Hearst Mansion. I mean,
Yeah.
come on, give me a break with his
Well,
Lydia.
he also talked about how he had, a poor upbringing. I was like, no.
Your dad was on the pro bowling tour.
Yeah, they may have not made tons of money back then, but here it can't be an episode of Ramblin' Man without me saying this. I went to Fulton where I saw a gun on the first day. You didn't have a rough childhood, Chris Hardwick. I'm sorry.
Well, the story there was that we all became friendly with Jenny McCarthy.
Yeah.
And she had been a Playboy playmate.
Wait, I wonder what's happening with her now. She's not.
Yeah, I know. Well, anyway, we were.
Yeah,
She was.
yeah.
She was, and she knew how to play the game. So she would occasionally just call me directly.
Oh, wow.
And ask when she could come on the show, or I had her number.
Yeah.
I could call her directly, and we would do bits with her.
Don't tell 13-year-old Jody this.
I mean, I've got a picture of Jenny McCarthy and Ed McMahon and Kevin and Bean on the beach in Santa Monica where we filmed a comedy bit. And it was, and Jenny's in a bikini rubbing suntan lotion on Kevin's back, and we had Ed McMahon in a full suit walk up and tell Kevin and Bean they needed to go be somewhere.
Oh my God!
And it was hilarious, right?
Yeah.
But they were all such fun. They liked us so much, and they liked the hipness of K-Rock, and it was all just nice. We were all just pals,
Yeah.
and we were all, and it wasn't like I had to go through their people. It was
Yeah.
like, we picked up Jenny and we drove her to the thing, and she's like, she wanted to be a star. We wanted to be stars. Everyone wanted, we're all, Ed McMahon at this point, the Tonight Show's over, and he's got to keep his engine going.
Yeah.
He doesn't have Johnny Carson money. He's got Ed McMahon money.
Yeah.
So he's got to promote Star Search, got to do all the things. Well, so Jenny is looking for a break, and she actually contacted Bean and said, I can't even get an audition at MTV. So Bean called Andy Schoen and said, look, as a favor to me, you got to give this girl an audition. I don't, whether you hire her or not doesn't matter, but at least you got to give her an audition. Yeah. And because they had no interest in hiring a Playboy playmate to be on Singled Out. Well, Jenny is funny and interesting and beautiful and nailed the audition. And she gets the job as the wacky sidekick on Singled Out. Well, now it's flipped, and she's all excited. She's thankful wants to come on the Kevin and Bean show and say, thank you for getting me the audition, and I got the show. And she asked me, she says, but I gotta bring the guy with me. I said, who is it? She said, he's a comedian. His name's Chris Hardwick. Nobody knows him, but I got to bring him along. Can I bring him?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I asked Kevin and Bean, and they're like, yeah, but he can't say anything. Don't let him talk. So I even tell them this. I said, look, he can come, but he's probably not going to get any airtime.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, sure. Well, of course, Chris is very personable also.
Yeah.
And he's funny and quick. I mean, remember that show with the @ symbol? At midnight.
At midnight, yeah. Oh, yeah, I watch that all the time. Yeah.
I liked that show. And he's got some comedic chops, right? Well, anyway, he's in the studio with them during the records that no one's listening to because the volume's turned down. And he starts doing, whatever it is he says, they put him on the air.
Yeah.
And the whole segment's going well. It's Kevin and Bean, Jenny McCarthy, and Chris Hardwick, all four of them sounding great together.
Yeah.
My phone rings, and it's the program director, Weatherly, and he says, who is that guy? Don't let him leave until I get there.
Oh, wow.
And so I go in and tell Hardwick, I said, look, Weatherly said wants to meet you.
Yeah.
And his eyes go wide, like, this is cool. And Weatherly offers him overnights and weekends. And Chris Hardwick started doing overnights on KROQ. And we would see him in the morning because he'd be on until 5:30.
Yeah.
And we'd come on at right after him at 5:30. And I remember specifically that we didn't have computers in the studio, and he was addicted to AOL. So he'd have his AOL going out in the common area in the hallway where the computer was. Isn't that weird? That instead of everyone having one, there'd be one computer out by the phones and by the secretary's desk. And Jimmy Kimmel would get on there and Hardwick would still be signed into AOL, and Kimmel would start creating havoc
Oh,
and sending
God.
messages to people
That's
as
amazing.
Chris Hardwick. That's amazing. Kimmel would always prank us all, including me. He was just prank.
What was the show he was on? That's the,
Besides Crank Yankers,
no, the
Man
radio
Show?
show where he was the producer guy.
this is well, he had a move. He moved around a lot.
Okay.
So he had
he
shows
was the
where he was
sports guy.
That's K-Rock.
Oh, that was
Yeah, so
K-Rock.
when he came to K-Rock as the comedy writer,
Yeah.
he wanted to worm his way in on the air. So he created a Brooklyn character called Jimmy the Sports Guy.
Yeah.
So he would sit. And my office had 2 desks in it. It was the morning show desk and then the Loveline desk. So he'd sit over there at the Loveline desk
Yeah.
and call into the studio and pretend to be a listener named Jimmy the Sports Guy. And he would talk about the sports. And I would sit at my desk pretending to be his mother. And I would, in my New York accent, say things like, Jimmy, your sandwich is ready. Jimmy, come up from the basement. Jimmy. Whatever
Yeah,
stupid thing. I would
yeah.
make it up. I was just improvising.
Yeah.
I was just having fun with it. And all I was in the background, it wasn't a major part or anything, but that was
Yeah.
the bit. And then ultimately, after we did that for, I mean, like weeks, not months, just a few weeks, he gets, quote unquote, invited to come into the studio and do sports,
Yeah.
which is, the next room over. And
Yeah.
that's how the character of Jimmy the Sports Guy,
Because-
that was his trick to get on the air.
Yeah.
And I had done that. I've been First Call Frank at a station, which was the same exact bit, except you call in and, they say, you should come here and work here. I'm like, okay. And you're already there. You already worked there. You're
Yeah.
just in the next room.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think I used to also listen to Corolla all the time, and
Yeah.
he would always tell the story about how he got in on the
Yeah,
radio,
he blames me.
being the shop guy.
Yeah, Mr. Bircham.
Mr. Bircham.
So
yeah.
Corolla blames me for blocking his path to show business, which is hilarious because
It's always somebody else's fault.
well,
with
I
him.
mean, in his book, I mentioned in his book and on his podcast because he needs a villain. And the reality of it, yeah, you can find it if you got one of Corolla's books about how he got into radio.
I think I read the first.
I think it was his first or second book. I couldn't tell you. I don't have.
I think
them.
I read the first one, and then I read the second one and got so angry at it I gave it away because
Well-
it was always somebody else's problem.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
here's a guy who has had a successful career
Yeah.
in show business, in comedy and in broadcasting. Very successful because I mean, Loveline itself
Yeah.
was if that was the last thing he did, he would still be considered
Oh yeah.
well known, a celebrity. Well, he needs a villain.
Yeah.
Who's the villain in this story? He walks into a radio station and gets hired, gets put on the air, is hilarious. Everyone loves him. He gets almost immediately, gets a high-profile show on that station and an MTV version of same show.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these things happened to him in
And
the course
Man
of-
Show on Comedy Central
Yeah.
shortly thereafter.
Right, because he and Jimmy had pitched that to ABC and they didn't buy it. They told him whatever the network told Jimmy to do, they did the exact opposite, and that became the Man Show.
Okay.
They told him it didn't appeal to women enough, and all he did was double down on
Oh yeah.
everything they told him not to
Girls
do.
on trampolines.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So, which was very much like the show we were doing on K-Rock. I mean, we were trying to do a male-oriented,
Yeah.
shock jock type show, and so Corolla needs a villain for his little story, and I'm it because he left a phone message. I had this pink slip of paper that said Ace, boxing coach, and we were trying to do a bit where Jimmy would box against one of the other guys, and there's so many other pieces of this puzzle that have to be put together. We need a venue. We need eventually we'll need a boxing coach, but I'm not even there yet. I need approval from management. I need a lot of things have to happen
Yeah.
that are on my plate to make this arrangement. So I'm not going to call the boxing coach back on the first day. I'm not ready for that
Yeah.
because there's other calls coming in. Hey, we can do it at this place in Reseda. Hey, we can do this. We can do this. And you've got all these options, and you're sifting through. And frankly, I wasn't overrun with boxing coaches. We had one, maybe two at most.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to call him.
Yeah.
Well, he couldn't wait. So he shows up and hangs out outside the studio. And then when Jimmy finally goes to the bathroom, they meet. It's love at first sight. And
yeah.
that's how we got into radio. And I was going to call him. Of course, I was going to call him.
Yeah.
It wasn't time yet. I needed another day or two to make sure every other thing was happening. You don't book the coach if you don't even know the event's happening yet.
Frank, he's got to pull himself up by his bootstraps.
Of course.
I mean,
so I get it. I get it, but I mean, I'm like, really? I'm the bad guy in this story
my
just
God.
because I didn't call you back within the first 24 hours? I mean, come on.
that does not surprise me at all. Anyway, okay, working for Kevin and Bean. I guess I'll go ahead and ask this here. Like I'd put, like I said,
Sure.
celebrity encounters earlier.
Yeah.
So you're talking about Tupac and stuff. So do you remember the first well-known person, maybe outside of radio, like that you met that you're like, holy crap, that's so-and-so?
Well, my dad,
And I mean outside of radio as in like
even as a kid,
people who were famous to you, but
sure.
maybe not
I
everybody
remember
else.
as a kid meeting either the governor or lieutenant governor of New York. Well, he probably was lieutenant governor. Malcolm Wilson was his name. And I met him at this Bob Hope concert that I talked about.
Yeah.
I was trying to go meet Bob Hope, but that didn't work out. And Malcolm Wilson said, "Oh, I knew your dad in Albany." And then I remember when I was 10, we went to Albany for like some reunion, and wherever we were, Nelson Rockefeller walks in and shakes my hand and goes, "Ah, yeah, the idea." I mean, I don't know how he actually talked, but I remember saying that. "Ah, yeah, your father worked for me." Ah. So I remember meeting the governor and lieutenant governor of New York as a kid and being impressed that they both knew my dad. And I thought, that's interesting. And my dad was friends with other local politicians and media types. So like when our Crestwood Library was in danger of closing, my dad knocks out a press release on his volunteerism, and Chris Wallace shows up. Now, Chris Wallace was unknown.
Yeah.
But he shows up to cover the story, and my dad's like, "Oh, that's Mike Wallace's son." So that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then even, so I would meet people through college, and then certainly through broadcasting, opportunities came up
Yeah.
to meet whoever came, like if someone came to a famous person came to college campus. But Dr. Ruth Westheimer came to the George Mason University, and part of her deal is you always have to have someone to read the embarrassing questions to Dr. Ruth. And the whole apparently the entire student council who was paying for this, I don't know why they all decided, but I was approached and they said, "We've got the perfect gig for you."
Oh my God.
Everyone thought you're the guy to read these embarrassing questions to Dr. Ruth. Because I mean, again, I'm thinking this is hilarious. I would wear a tie to school because I was the station manager of the campus radio station at college, much like I had been editor of the paper in high school. So I was kind of, I don't know, I just was comfortable dressing up. I used to have to dress up to work at Wolf Trap. You have to wear a jacket and tie sometimes.
Yeah.
And in high school, elementary school, I was always jacket and tie. So I'm not uncomfortable. So I think I'll put that on and I'll go and I'll stand up there with Dr. Ruth and I'll read the questions that have been submitted by the students. It was great. So
I wish I could do an impersonation of her. I can.
Dr. Ruth Westheimer. You got to give it the name. Yes, what? Give it the name. So first, you of course have to lubricate.
Oh God.
Yeah. So anyway, she was a piece of work. She's still alive. I think she's like 100.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I had sort of those things I would gravitate toward the spotlight. In working at Wolf Trap, I remember, the president showed up at Wolf Trap one time to see it was actually Jimmy Carter. I think he was still president. Showed up because his daughter was in a violin recital in the afternoon. They took over her violin Suzuki class took over Wolf Trap one afternoon, and here comes the helicopter,
And here's all these other guys.
And then they drove him, and then they drove him in his limo around the backstage where our office was.
That's amazing.
So there were guys like a famous flute player named Jean-Pierre Rampal, who's a massively famous flute player, right? And my boss was like, I don't want to have to wait around till intermission to give Rampal his money. Because in Rampal's contract, this is unusual. It's not the normal, at least I thought it was unusual. But he would get $10,000 cash at intermission. And I guess he would get the rest at the end of the show, maybe, I don't know, whatever it was. But my boss gave me $10,000 in cash. and said, hand deliver this to Jean-Pierre Rampal. I'm like, oh, okay. That seems reasonable.
Oh my God. I'm trying to remember who it was that I heard talking about. There's some famous musician now that played as a backing performer to, I think it was Chuck Berry, and said that when Chuck Berry arrived, he arrived in like a Cadillac.
Yep.
He got handed a briefcase full of money.
Yeah.
He walked out on stage with his guitar and that briefcase of money, and he set it right down next to the mic stand. He played his hour, and then he picked up that briefcase and walked back and got into his Cadillac and drove off. And they're like,
Yeah.
it was the funniest thing watching him. They're like, I don't know when he got screwed, but whenever
Yep.
he got screwed, he was like, that was never going to happen again.
Yep, that's what it means exactly.
Yeah.
At some point, these guys lost out on their money, and this is now in the contract. This is how they get paid.
Okay.
You know, and so I've got this wad of $100 bills, and in an envelope, and he opens up the envelope. He looks at it and says, "Thank you very much." And I'm like, "Thank you, nice to meet you, Jean-Pierre Rampal."
Yeah.
And I'm going back to it. So that's before radio, but then during the course of radio, especially in that time frame, you would meet stars on their way up and stars on their way down.
Oh, yeah.
You know, very rarely would you meet someone at the peak of their fame.
Yeah.
You know, like a Tom Cruise would occasionally do an interview, but it was rare, and it was because he initiated it.
Yeah.
Now, book companies were very good about getting their authors on, because book companies were like the only, more so than movie companies, it felt like, or certainly more so than TV networks, seemed to feel that radio sells books. So getting an author on, I mean, it could be George Carlin, it could be Hillary Clinton, it could be, a massively famous people who had a book out would drop by, plug the Captain Kangaroo, these people that I wanted to meet my whole life. Julia Child.
My friend, she was my friend who lives in Jersey, who would not go into New York. She was the special events coordinator at a Borders there, right there in Jersey.
Huge
And
stars.
she was like, she would rattle off names of people she had met. But the ones that I remember the most was, she was like, Roddy Piper,
Yeah.
bless his heart, showed up drunk, but was the most fun person
bet.
that she had ever met at any of those.
So
And
that's
she
crazy.
was like, oh yeah, the fabulous Moolah, just wrestlers. But she was like, I got to meet David Sedaris before most people knew who he was.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most famous graphic designers is this guy by the name of Chip Kidd. And she was like, oh, yeah, Chip came in there because he's written a few books. And she was like, he is the best. He is the funnest, nicest person. So I got to meet him at a
Nice.
conference one time. I walked through a lobby, and he's sitting there waiting to check in. And I walk up, and I go, you're Chip Kidd. And he stands up and goes, yes, I am. And so we talked for a minute. He's super nice. And then later on, I go to see a friend of mine who is presenting, who is now one of the most famous graphic designers, Draplin, Aaron James Draplin. And I'm sitting there down front talking to Draplin, and then all of a sudden, Chip Kidd sits down next to me. He's like, hey, how are you doing? I was like, I'm good. He was like, okay, can I sit right here next to you? I was like, yeah, Chip Kidd.
Nice.
Yeah, you can. And after,
And probably because you said hi to him earlier.
yeah,
He felt comfortable and safe. Like, okay, I don't have to feel alone. At least this guy knows who I am.
that's how Draplin was. That Draplin, I'd seen him speak at a smaller conference like 2 weeks beforehand. And then I saw him at this huge conference in Boston, and he was standing over the side. He wasn't big at the time.
Yeah.
And so I walked up to him. I was like, hey, man, I saw you at Weapons a couple weeks ago. He's like, oh, can I sit with you? I was like, yeah, come on, man.
See, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a rush. And people, even in a smaller world here in
Yeah.
Knoxville, when I do Einstein Simplified, people are like, oh, they're excited to meet you
Yeah.
or talk to you. Even if they get a little embarrassed, like, you know who you remind me of? What comedian you remind me of?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful to know that you've brightened this person's day.
Yeah.
And whether it's because they listen to me on some radio station, and as I mentioned, I've got all these silos.
Yeah.
That people know me from different things, and I'm always curious to know which silo that they're going to recognize me from, if at all.
Yeah.
And I'm sometimes surprised, but it's still nice and gratifying, and it's never embarrassing. It's always pleasant. That's why we do it. It's why I
Yeah.
do it. It's why I'm on TV. It's why I'm on radio. It's why I'm on stage. It's why I'm on the internet. It's why that's the why.
Well, see, I'm the opposite. I do this because I I don't like this. I hate the sound of my voice. I don't like any of this. But it's I have people in my life. I was like, no one is going to hear their story unless which sounds kind of arrogant, but I don't
I
mean it
realized
that
that
way.
when I was going through your archives, and that's why I listened to the Aaron Donovan episode first, which I'm still working on. I'm still working my way through it.
Wait till you get to next year. You'll finally hit the Shane Ryan one. I think that'll take all of 2023.
Oh my gosh! But I picked them because I know them.
Yeah.
But I also listened to the Adopo interview because I know Adopo. So
Yeah.
I was looking for things I recognized just to get drop myself in, immerse myself in with some connection, some landmark that I know I
Right.
can touch back on and go, okay, I understand what's happening.
So it's kind of funny. Out of all the episodes I've done, the one I call them the blue check marks, like the people who are verified on Twitter
That
or
makes
Instagram.
sense. Yeah.
They are not my biggest downloads. It's the weird ones. Like early on, it was I interviewed Aaron Slocum and Kat Torbett on motherhood,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was one of the biggest downloads for a long time. And it was or interviewing.
See, I know who they are, though.
Yeah.
And I also almost wonder if they helped you out by sharing,
sharing-
it to their networks.
But now the biggest is, I think the two biggest downloads are when I had my friend Erin Hall on, and she talked about CrossFitting the first time, and then she talked the second time about CrossFitting in Qatar, and then her coming out story.
Mm-hmm.
Those are I think the two. God, if she listens to this, she's going to get a bigger head. Erin.
I thought that really actually CrossFit in Qatar should be its own sub-podcast.
Yeah.
Where it's for specializing in just nothing but Qatar CrossFit. That should be the
she-
whole...
if she had stayed over
show.
there, it would have. But it's interesting to me, like having someone like Hot Sauce Holtzy, who's a UFC fighter, like, and I even promoted the crap out of that. He shared it. Nothing. Like, no, I was like, that's so weird because UFC is a huge world for like podcasts and media and stuff, and he's a bigger known.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Be sure to tune in a couple weeks for part 2 of my interview with Frank Murphy.